Okay, everybody. Does the mic work? Does everything work? Excellent. If I can get us underway, that would be really good. It's now 1 minute past 10. Welcome, everyone, to this rearranged meeting of Strategy and Resources and Performance Committee. Thank you very much for coming. I know this was rearranged. It's half-term week, so we've got a few substitutes around the table today. Thank you very much to those of you who made the time to join us today. Okay, I've got a few the usual things. We allow filming and photography, so feel free to film and photograph things if you want to. Please don't have your phones on ringtone because that's off-putting. We are live streaming as usual, and we will have everything on the website as normal. If the alarm rings, we will stop the meeting. You know, we're not expecting the alarm to ring, but if it does, I'm sure there will be somebody to tell us what to do. Which brings us to the actual agenda for the day. Apologies for absence. Michelle, do we have any?
We have apologies from Councillor Nefsinger and Councillor Slatter is substituting. Councillor Whelan and Councillor Batchelor is substituting. Councillor Corney and Councillor Costello is substituting. Councillor Sharp and Councillor Bowden will be late.
Chair, if I may, Steve, Councillor Count has just had a very urgent call that has had to pop out the room to take. He will be back. Thank you.
I am so sorry, I didn't even notice. I hope everything is all right. Thank you very much for that. As you've heard, Councillor Nefsinger is not able to be with us, so you've got me. Sorry about that. We have a very chunky agenda today, and as some of you know, we have another meeting this afternoon that this room is needed for, starting at 2 p.m. So can I ask, please, that you are mindful of time when we manage this meeting, and please can I ask everybody to consider efficiency when they make their contributions. So thank you very much indeed. Declarations of interest. Do we have any statutory or pecuniary declarations of interest to be made on any of the items on the agenda today? I'm looking around. I see none. If anything comes to mind, you can say anything at the start of any agenda items as well. For the moment, we're going to carry on. Minutes and action log. I am being asked to approve the minutes of the last meeting, which was held on the 9th of July. I trust everyone's had a look. Are there any problems with them? Anything at all? I see nothing. Therefore, I will later sign them as an accurate record. Right. What we got? Action log, which we also have included in the published papers for today. There are things that are complete and things that have notes against them as being ongoing. Are there any comments or questions about the action log? I see none. It's on the record, and anyone who wishes to take anything up specifically can do so with the relevant officer after the meeting. Okay, item 3 is petitions and public questions. I am not aware of any. Michelle, can we confirm there is none? Therefore, we shall move on. Item number 4, the first of our key decisions, the integrated finance monitoring report for the period 5 of 24-25. We have got the head of finance to talk to us today. Hi, Stephen. Would you like to take it away?
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, everyone. So this report presents the consolidated management accounts for the Council for period 5, which is the end of August. It sets out the forecast revenue and capital budget position for the current year and the position of the balance sheet as well. And it also sets out several key recommendations for the committee dealing with financial management. For the revenue position, as reported to this committee previously, and like many councils, we continue to face a number of significant pressure areas, and at period 5, there is a forecast £9.6 million overspend, or 2% for the year. The main drivers for this are set out in the report, but in summary are firstly, the impact of national issues around the cost of placements for children in care. The national supply chain for placements has not improved, and costs are continuing to rise despite work to achieve better value for money locally. Second is home to school transport, partly linked to our high spend on special educational needs, but also impacted by a constrained market and rising prices. Thirdly, one of our contracted waste disposal centres not being operational due to compliance with government regulations, resulting in more waste going to landfill. And finally, income expectations from some of the council's major income generation work across several directorates has been impacted by works delays and national economic conditions. And these are mitigated partly through lower than expected spend within adult social care, particularly on the older people side, where demand has not grown in line with budgeted projections, and through additional corporate funding from grants and business rates. We continue to forecast a large pressure on the council's dedicated schools grant budget, such that the cumulative deficit on those is expected to be over £50 million at year end. That deficit is still subject to a time-limited statutory override in terms of accounting for it, but remains a very substantial risk and therefore is subject to extensive work between the council and central government through the Safety Valve programme still. On capital, currently a balanced position is forecast on capital budgets, with the limited slippage projections so far being in line with allowances for it. Turning to page 41 of your pack, recommendation A before the committee relates to several capital budget changes. These have gone through the council's officer business case and scrutiny process and are put forward to the committee for your consideration. The largest of these relate to work to deliver additional school places and on the council's accommodation improvement programme. Turning lastly to the balance sheet, the report firstly deals with reserves, earmarked reserves, which are the subject of recommendations B, C, and D to you today. These relate to a need to draw down reserves to cover legal costs related to the guided busway prosecution from the specific risks reserve, to draw down from the change digital reserve for a set of posts linked to delivery of the change strategy, which is on the agenda later on as well, should that be agreed, and to the public health reserve linked to a grant ending. And more detail on those is in the main report at page 43 of the pack. And then finally, the report also summarises the council's debt position, and this month requests permission in recommendation E to write off 3 high-value accounts of customers or their estates who owe the council money, but where we believe we've exhausted all reasonable economic recovery action. The key issues in each case and some wider learning and improvement points is set out in the report. And I believe we've got certainly the council's director who runs the debt recovery service, and potentially also the director responsible for adult social care service here in case of any detailed questions. But I will leave the intro there. Thank you very much, Chair.
Stephen, thank you very much for that. Are there any questions for Stephen to begin with? Yes, Graham.
Thank you, Chair. On page 35 about the DSG, is there any information from the budget that would be any use to any of us?
Well, so my understanding, the budget certainly set out some additional funding and also potentially some additional capital funding in the school space generally, which may also touch on the high needs block, which is the pressure area. I think we're still digesting certainly what the additional funding means in terms of timing and what it will mean value-wise for the council.
Stephen, thank you very much. We have another Stephen who would like to come in.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. Stephen's right. As you'll be aware, the fiscal event yesterday in the Chancellor's budget statement is obviously one we're going to have to spend some considerable time analysing. As you might expect me to say, and I'll use that well-worn phrase, the devil is always in the detail, so we await the proper local government financial settlement, which is yet to come. Clearly, officers within the council and the representative bodies we're a member of will continue to try and analyse and understand the implications of the Chancellor's statements yesterday. But at this stage, I wouldn't want to commit officers or myself to giving you any confirmed position on what the Chancellor said yesterday. I would suggest that that is something we'll be in a position to brief you more fully about during the course of November, hopefully, and then when we receive the detailed settlement, probably in December as normal. So I just thought that might be helpful to say, Chair, mindful of your comments around efficiency. Thank you.
It's very useful. Thank you very much, Stephen. Are there any more questions for Stephen Howarth? In which case, are there any points for comment or debate on this item? Yes, Steve.
Thank you, Chair, and apologies if I had to dash out the room just then. There might be more of that, and I'll try and keep it to a minimum. Just in terms of how this works at the moment with the changes to the constitution that were brought in regarding amendments, I found myself reading the 314-page report in front of me once it was drafted and sent out to us. Then we have a time pressure to actually discuss whether there are going to be any amendments coming in. And I found myself on this particular paper, this IFMR, with a number of questions, which I sent over to Stephen and a few other officers. And I wanted to thank them for their prompt response, which actually is why I'm not sitting here asking questions, and they've actually dealt with them. However, the very real fact of the change in the constitution, meaning if there was an amendment, it makes it incredibly difficult for members to handle this in a timely fashion. There is a weekend in the way. There is the possibility that officers cannot respond because we only have that day and a half. There is the possibility that I can't read the papers on day one of release, and it just makes it incredibly difficult. So I just want to say that there were questions outside. Just to highlight two of the big ones for me, it was why the borrowing was going to be about 100 million out, and the explanations, in my mind, accounted for about 22 million of that. So I had a response, and a lot of it's to do with cash flow. So I was satisfied with the response. I'm not happy that it's 100 million pounds out, but I'm satisfied with the responses going towards that. And the other one was the write-offs, and the write-offs which are on recommendation A. My concern here, so the question was about actually issuing a, so generally speaking, the way that this would be handled is an assessment would be made. Can the person pay some part of their care package? Yes, the debt mounts up. And when you go to recover it, the money's gone somehow. There was either a miscalculation or the money's disappeared. And in many of these cases, it may be attached to a house that somebody was living in. So my question was, at the point at which we agree to have some debt against the house, are we actually able to put a charge against it, and why isn't this happening? And the answer for the benefit of the committee is it's not possible. We can't do that. So if it's not set out in law that we can, we can't, and therefore this is part of the thing. But the concerns I have, which I'm just going to raise with the committee now, is I'm satisfied with the answers. But when I read it repeatedly about lessons learnt, there's similar lessons each time. There's similar shortfalls in well, if we'd have done something at the start, if we'd done different, or there was a shortage of staff at some periods in time. And it's just that, and even we're advised that there will be more write-offs. And it's a concerning situation that we don't ever seem to get past the lessons learnt stage. We don't see a massive downfall in the actual amount of money we have to write off. So I just wanted to draw that to attention that I'm satisfied with the officer responses. There are no amendments from me. I'm going to support the recommendations as they stand. And I just think that the whole timing of the constitutional change really, really doesn't work. Thank you.
Steve, thank you very much for that. I hope everything's okay, and feel free to manage what's happening and leave the meeting if you need to, but I hope everything's okay. On the actual stuff, we will make note of that. I mean, there was a reason that we introduced the change to that. I mean, it is actually quite difficult for our staff to deal with amendments. It wasn't something that we ourselves personally have to do as much work as the officers of this council when amendments come in. But I'm quite happy to take the comments and see whether we can talk about it and see whether we can find a solution in relation to that. The debt write-off, I mean, I know it's a very, very, very difficult area. Richard wants to come in, and I think it might be useful to hear what he's got to say.
Yes, I'm not commenting on the point about the amendments to the Constitution. That's been dealt with by the chair. But on the substance, first of all, I thought they were very proper questions, and I welcome the questions that have been put by the opposition. On adult social care debt in particular, as Councillor Count probably does recall, because he was substituting Adults and Health Committee, this is subject to a really intensive piece of work by the officers. We are behind where we should be on debt. I don't hide that at all. But we know that there are some very good reasons behind that, and the actions that are being taken by officers are having effect, and we think that can improve the situation overall financially. And constantly we're trying to balance that against fairness and sensitivity in the way that we chase debt. But it's a completely proper question to scrutinise us on, and the Health and Health Committee, I promise you, is looking at this very carefully in our oversight role. And the other point I would say, more generally listening to Councillor Count's contribution, it is worrying. You know, why don't we just be honest with each other, whether it's the administration or the opposition? Our council and councils up and down the country, because we're in no different position and probably a bit better than many, is the honest answer, are really struggling at the moment. And should we be aware of that and worried about it? Yes, we should. And so I think it's very fair comment. There aren't easy answers. We're all doing our jobs. We have confidence in the officers for the jobs they're doing. But the fact with the public that we should be honest about the difficulties of the financial situation we're in, absolutely.
Thank you, Richard. And I think, you know, scrutiny in this area is very welcome. So I think we will have to continue to talk about it. It's a very, very, very difficult area. Are there any further contributions to the debate? I see none. So in the spirit of efficiency, I'll try to move us on. The recommendations in front of us are to note the changes in capital grants and contributions and to agree a capital budget changes, including funding from potential borrowing. To delegate to the Chief Executive in consultation with the Chair and Vice Chair of this meeting to draw down up to 1.6 million from earmarked reserves to cover the legal cost and preparation of the case relating to the guided busway. 674k for temporary posts and capacity in the Human Resources Service and Policy Insight and Change Service to support the change strategy. More on that later. 400k for the Public Health Grant Reserve to support the mitigation of risks if drug and alcohol grants end in March, and to authorize the write-offs about which we have been talking about. I sense that there is agreement about these, so can I take them unanimously? If not, please shout now. We will take them unanimously. Thank you very much, members, for that. Item number 5, Waterbeach train station relocation. We have got Tom Kelly with us, or as my notes say, the Service Director of Finance and Procurement. Thank you very much, Tom, for being here. Whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Chair. And also alongside me, I've got Niamh Matthews, who's an Assistant Director at the Greater Cambridge Partnership. This report is about the funding approach for the relocation of Waterbeach train station. The project forms part of the Greater Cambridge Partnership programme, and the primary decision-making forum on this project is the GCP's Executive Board. Councillor Moschini is also the chair of that joint committee, but importantly, it comprises other councils and bodies as well. Under the GCP's assurance framework and the Council's governance and constitution, we've brought this report to Strategy and Resources and Partnership and Performance Committee today, as it entails the County Council as the accountable body, and because GCP itself is not an entity entering into a long-term funding agreement. And this agreement will extend beyond the lifetime of the GCP deal and the programme plan. The report explains the business case for the relocation of the station, and importantly, it's a planning condition of the new town. I won't say any more on that unless there are further questions, and just focus my comments on the financial and funding position, as that is the consideration for this committee. The total scheme budget is 43.3 million, and of that, 20 million is from the Greater Cambridge City Deal budget. That funds both the station and the associated Hall Road. 23.35 million of that number is to come through developer contributions. And following negotiations, the City Deal is in the position of needing to manage the delivery of the station. Homes England, a central government agency, are keen that the project proceeds and is enabled. They have offered funding of a repayable grant, and this means that rather than providing the cash flow locally until the developer contributions come forward and have this underpinned by local funds or local taxpayers, Homes England will provide the upfront funding and be repaid by developers as these funds come in during the years ahead and into the next decade. The report details the procurement process and the need to contain the project to the projected budget. To be clear, any overspend against the budget would sit with the GCP budget and require reprioritisation in the event of an overspend. The funding agreement is recommended as it's favourable for where local risk is situated and managed. It shifts the risk of developer contributions from being held locally to Homes England. And on that basis, we recommend that this committee supports the agreement for its part.
Tom, thank you very much for that. And Niamh, thank you for coming. Now, before I invite members to ask you questions, I am advised that the local member for Waterbeach, Councillor Bradnam, wants to ask a question. We don't seem to have her, in which case, no, she does not want to ask a question. But we'll get in touch with her after the meeting to see if she's got any questions she can ask Tom and Niamh at any point. They are extremely helpful at all times. In which case, we will first of all see if there's any questions for Tom and or Niamh from anybody. Hey, I'm totally never going to remember this. We're going to start with Mark.
Thank you, Chair. Tom, just a very quick question, and I'm totally in agreement with everything that's put here. But at £43.5 million, the only thing I've got this to relate to was a few years ago the reopening and the new station at Soham, which was 18.6 million in total. You know, so how come this is more than twice as expensive? It seems an incredible figure. I'm glad to see where the money's coming from, by the way. I think this is what the GCP should be doing. But it just seems an absolutely astronomical figure compared to something that I've got of a comparable nature.
Thank you. So Niamh may want to comment on this as well. I think it's worth clarifying 6 million of the budget here is for the Hall Road, which relates to the kind of wider development. The estimates that have been presented and also checked by Homes England, I believe, have been validated by the GCP specialist rail consultant.
Yeah, that's right, Councillor Gulsack. We've got some sort of rail specialists on this, and it's a relocation of the station, not a kind of opening of an existing station. So there's broader kind of infrastructure associated with it. Maybe worth mentioning also that there's a risk pot built into the sum as well of about £5 million.
Thank you, and again through you, Chair. I'm glad there's a risk pot. There should be a risk pot on every project that goes ahead. So I accept that, but there really should be a contingency, if you want to put it a different way. So I do recognise that's there. But no, thank you for the answers. It's a broader infrastructure project than just simply a station build. So I accept that.
Thank you, Mark. Steve, did you want to go next?
Yes, thank you. And once again, thank you to the officers for giving me a briefing on this Monday morning at short notice, including Niamh coming over from the GCP. One of the questions we didn't have answered at that time was, will there be any change to timetabling? I don't know if you've got any update on that, but could you just give us an idea of how many trains actually stop at Waterbeach every hour, particularly in the congested times at the moment, and whether there's any possible change to that, and also whether those trains can stop at Cambridge North? Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Count. Can I come back on the detail of that if I write to you separately and make sure that I've got the answers right? Speak with the project team and with Network Rail.
Yeah, I understand that you won't be able to answer anything in the future, but I was just wondering how many trains are stopping there at peak times at the moment.
Let me come back to make sure I get it right.
Okay, thank you.
We'll get, Michelle's making a note. We're going to get, shall we get that answer circulated to all members of this committee as soon as it's ready? It seems a bit technical. I don't want Niamh to say a number that's wrong. Was that it, Councillor Count? Do you have anything else? Is that all good? Excellent. In which case, right, I'm going to try and go down the table. Peter, and then Edna, and then Graham.
This is a non-technical answer for Steve. I live on the Liverpool Street line, so I know at peak hours that there's quite a number that Ely-bound trains, obviously stopping at Waterbeach, because I often take those to get off at Whittlesford. From memory, it's between 5 and 7, 2 or 3 trains, something like that.
Very good. We'll compare the technical answer when it comes with that, and then we'll score you. I have to say I have no memory for those kinds of details, but that sounds about right. Edna, do you want to go next?
Yes, thank you very much. Through the chair, could I please ask what is the difference between, oh dear. Sorry, I've got very badly behaved microphone. Yes, thank you very much. Through the chair, could I just ask what is the difference between this repayable grant and a loan? I mean, it is obviously a type of loan with a small L, but is there something about, is it just the nature of the organisation that's providing the funding? Is it something about the terms and conditions that apply if there's default, etc.? Just we've gone to great lengths to describe it as a repayable grant, so I just wondered what that means. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I think we've adopted the terminology that Homes England used themselves in the funding agreement. It will negate the need for in cash flow terms for the county council or the GCP to borrow. So it removes, it is equivalent effectively to a loan because we won't need to take a loan ourselves for that purpose. The way it deals with interest is maybe slightly different as well from any other loan the councils take. So I think the commitment is that Homes England will take the indexation on the developer contributions rather than an interest amount. And again, that's, we would say, is favourable from the county council's perspective because it means it's a straight pass through from developers to Homes England, and the kind of timing issue and how quickly that comes forward, that risk is moved away from the local public sector. Yeah.
Thank you, Tom, for that answer. Graham?
I think I've read in the papers that there's absolutely no liability on the county council from any of this, so that's absolutely fine. But is there any guarantee that the developer will actually pay back all this money in time, or will Homes England run the risk that they are liable? I'm thinking, do you have a bond or something similar that will guarantee this?
I think that the starting point is that will be Homes England's position to carry the risk. It will go with Section 106 collection in particular. So in some cases, bonds are appropriate. But importantly, that risk sits with Homes England in this case. If you want to add any more.
Thank you very much. Are there any further questions for Tom and or Niamh? I see nothing, but just stay with us just for a moment. Any contributions, comments, or debate more in general? Anyone? Steve?
Yes, thank you, Chair. And again, thank you to the officers for the support in my questions offline before the meeting. So this is a good thing, in my opinion. There's a lot of homes going up at Waterbeach. I'm not going to name a number because I don't have it at the tip of my fingers. And it's really dependent on how quickly or slowly they get built. But having this kind of transport is a good thing for the people of Waterbeach and those that can access it from nearby. I would say that it's not the only thing. There's a guided busway being planned there as well, which is, or a segregated busway, I should certainly say, which will serve there as well. The concerns I have aren't connected with what's in front of us today, which is actually a positive step to remove risk from the county council, which is not really the appropriate body for taking this risk, and putting it firmly onto New Homes England. Homes England, sorry, which is there to enable and deliver growth in housing. This unlocks that growth in housing, so it's appropriate that they take the risk. Because the questions about if a developer renegotiates later on, which I've seen many times on their Section 106 obligations, I'm sure the planning departments and the lawyers that have do very good jobs of challenging viability, and yet time and time again we do see viability used to reduce section 106 obligations. Now, in this particular case, if we didn't approve what was in front of us today, the result of that would be that Cambridgeshire County Council would take the hit on 20 million or part of it. By taking this step today, Homes England, which is the appropriate body, takes the £20 million hit. The risk, the other risks involved are the risk on if the tender document comes back over budget, which with the prices involved, I'd be quite shocked at. But this is not a risk for the county council either, because at that point in time, it would have to come back in front of appropriate bodies to actually start the decision and say what we're going to do. So decision today does not affect that risk. However, the one risk that is not covered in the paper, which I did take offline, is what happens if the tender is awarded. A normal tender of this nature does have a pain gain part of the contract, those elements that we or the contracting body, the GCP, agrees to take the risk on, and those that the contractor agrees to take the risk on. Now, if a risk arises that the GCP has taken on board, which exceeds the budget in front of us today, my question, seeing as it wasn't covered in the paper, was who takes on responsibility for that? As part of the intro today, that was covered. That would be covered by the GCP. Now, by the time this is built, the GCP will be in its final years if it passes the Gateway Review next year. And so the decision will be what's left in the pot, what's earmarked against that pot, and what has to give. So by moving ahead today, there is a risk that other projects in the GC pipeline may or may not complete should these risks come home to roost. However, again, these are not a risk for the county council. I'm pleased with the recommendation. One of the concerns I have, which are nothing to do with the recommendations or my actual thinking that, yes, we should be moving ahead with this, is just the actual amount of money it takes to do anything on the rail network. It's always an extremely high budget. And what you don't get is any assurance at the start of what that means. So we built Cambridge North Station, and the driver for building Cambridge North Station was actually to deliver local people on the cross country to actually get off at Cambridge North, one of the key employment sites. And lo and behold, after building it, or when Network Rail took over, actually the cross-country train doesn't stop there. And my fear is by going ahead with these kinds of projects, when you actually get them built, the changes that you're hoping for in the timetabling don't arrive and don't deliver what they say, because of the capacity of the rail network is already finely stretched. I've had a look at the current timetabling. I'm very fortunate that the trains, the 5 trains, shall we say, in peak hours between 7 and 9 currently go from Waterbeach to Cambridge Central in about 10 minutes, and they all stop at Cambridge North, which is an absolute luxury, taking about 4 or 5 minutes. So this will be a far better service for anybody, as opposed to guided bus that wants to take those 2 routes. In fact, better than the car, so it should achieve modal shift. However, those of us that live further afield, such as March, we cannot use the train to get off at Cambridge North because it doesn't stop there. And anybody on these trains at the moment will know that the trains do not have the capacity for extra growth. And one of the problems we have with that is nobody's building diesel trains anymore and the line isn't electrified. Right? So we heard a solution at East West Rail in the budget yesterday, and we heard an announcement today that actually somebody is coming forward with a slightly different solution of electrification on parts of the line and the batteries having enough storage for the rest of the line. So my plea is actually, as we're building the station, let's investigate what trains we can get to run on there, not just a change to the timetable, but to a change to the trains, because the faster accelerating and decelerating trains, which I've already asked Jeremy Eagle to have a look at on our behalf, may actually be able to stop somewhere else. And those people that get on Cambridge to go to or from Ely or anything in between, which is this is in between, those trains are full. Those trains are full now. They have been for years. And whilst this will drive up usage, they'll be trying to get onto a train that's already full. So we can't treat this as a standalone item. It has to be tied up to a train and the actual deliverability of the train service. Just making people aware. I'll be supporting the recommendations. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Steve. And may I just say, I think Steve is well aware that, 99% of that unfortunately really isn't anything to do with this meeting, although, you know, it is appropriate that we should be asking the questions. As a regular user of Cambridge North myself, I have to say it was a lot worse when it started, and it is getting better in terms of the sort of places you can get to from there. It is very much the intention that when you've got the infrastructure in place, that it will get on towards delivering what we actually need for the 11,000 homes that are coming to Waterbeach. And there is a bigger risk in doing nothing, as I'm sure everybody agrees. I have got on the train from Cambridge North to March. I have. I mean, I'm sure that there should be more, but maybe we should try and get more, and that would be quite good. But in terms of this is a very, very positive step. Homes England know that these kinds of S106 agreements carry quite a lot of risk, and it is a welcome step for the council that we no longer have to carry that risk, because we are the accountable body for GCP. Once GCP ceases to exist, if there's any problems, we inherit them. So this takes away the risk of inheriting one particular aspect, which from what I can tell, everyone here welcomes. Are there any further comments? Anything, questions? Yes, Mark.
Yes, it's a common in debate, Chair, through you. The real beauty of Waterbeach Station, similar to other smaller stations along the line, Whittleswood was mentioned, Whittleswood's a really perfect example, is that they actually serve a wider community of villages and hamlets for people to get onto the main rail network. One of the biggest failings, and again, I'll use Whittlesford, or I could use Waterbeach, or I could use even Ely as an example, is the ability for people to get to these stations on time. So we need integrated bus routes, we need integrated service bus route. I can't remember the correct terminology, the guided bus route, but we also still need car provision parking places. We need somewhere for people to be able to get onto these buses and onto these trains and effectively use them. I'm a veteran of London commuting from Ely, and I can concur with Peter's figures on the stopping at Waterbeach, because coming home, I used to really hate stopping at Waterbeach. Get me home, just get me home. Why are we stopping here where you know, two people may alight or not? But I think it's absolutely critical that when we move forward on these sort of things, that we don't just look at success as building a station. Building success is building the station that truly reaches all those that want to reach it, and enables them to do so that they can park the car, they can get there on a bus in time for the busy trains, etc., etc. So a lot of trust that that's all involved in this project, but I think that's a key point.
It is very much, and if I may comment on that very, very quickly, that the need to get better integration between buses and train stations is behind. It comes through in every page of the consultation currently live from the Combined Authority about bus reform. It's one of the things Stagecoach don't do, and it's one of the things we should get them to do, which is absolutely agreed. In terms of this particular station, the station needs to move so that it serves a very, very big growing community. That's the point of it. So I'm really hoping that, I mean, I'm getting the idea that people are generally supportive of these recommendations, and that's very welcome. Are there any further questions or comments? In the interest of speed, I will go on to the recommendations. We are being recommended to approve the receipt to this grant to forward fund the works on the station, delegate authority to the Executive Director of Finance and Resources in consultation with the Chair and Vice Chair to agree the final terms and execute, and note what the total budget is going to be at the end. I am minded to take these as approved unanimously. If anybody disagreed, please shout now. There is none. We will therefore take these as unanimous. Thank you very much, everyone. And Tom and Neve, thank you so much for coming. Agenda item number 6, business planning. We have got an update on the business planning process, which accompanies us throughout the year, as we all know. We have got the Executive Director of Strategy and Partnerships and the Service Director of Finance and Procurement to introduce. So Sue and Tom, would you like to take it away?
Thank you very much, Chair, and good morning all. So we have a set of papers before committee today setting out the context for business planning over the next year and the following 5 years. The papers, as you know, include a refresh of the strategic framework, the latest results around the quality of life survey, a refresh of the consultation and engagement strategy, and a change strategy setting out how we'll reorientate the council in the coming years. They're all important papers setting the context for our business planning over this coming period. But we start with this paper, which is in two parts. First of all, setting out the current financial position, and then secondly, the process we will go through to determine the business plan and the budget. So I'm going to hand back over to Tom, who will summarise the current financial position as we know it at this point in time. So thank you, Tom.
Thank you. So, Chair, if I could just take the committee then to page 113 onwards. The committee will see here the table and graph that outline the predicted budget gap over the coming years. The committee will be familiar with the position at February full council. So we left the position at that point with a budget gap for 25-26 at 23.5 million and similar gaps in the years ahead. And then the position at the end of that table at the top of page 113 predicts that budget position as we know it, ahead of the identification of any savings for this year. The committee will see that the gap has grown to nearly 40 million in the new year one of the business plan for 25-26 and large gaps thereafter. And you see that in the graph form at the bottom of that page. The committee's already heard this morning important announcements in the budget yesterday, several lines of interest there for the council. And we'll be kind of looking closely at the local government provisional finance settlement as that comes forward. Importantly, how government decides on need and deprivation looking ahead will be really critical. The table at 3.5 then outlines some of the individual budget gaps. We've already heard some of those referred to in the earlier report, both local pressures and issues that we see across the country. So children's placement, waste diversion, and the impact of our current overspend outlined there. There'll be more to come in future reports on the Chief Finance Officer's assessment of our reserves position, and in particular the balance sheet. And you can see the trajectory for reserves ahead is already set out to decline going forward. That will be an important consideration for this committee. At the bottom of page 115, you can see how the budget gap builds up through the amounts we anticipate requiring for inflation, demand pressures across the period ahead, and that £39.3 million budget gap. Sue will go on to describe the process for the further information to come through to committee in terms of how the council intends to address that budget gap and respond to the national announcements. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. So as with last year, we will set out the draft business plan and budget at the meeting of this committee on the 17th of December, so that business plan and the budget, the draft budget, can be scrutinised by the policy and service committees throughout January. And so we have the final draft business plan and budget coming back to Strategy, Resources and Performance on the 28th of January for recommendation to full council on the 11th of February. In addition, we're going to be hearing, as I've said, around the quality of life survey soon, but we do set out here our proposal for engagement and consultation around the business plan and budget specifically, beginning with a period of engagement starting on Monday the 4th of November through to the 2nd of December, so that residents can share their views specifically on priorities for the council to consider as it prepares its plans for the future. And then this engagement will be followed by a period of consultation on the draft plan and budget once it's published. So that'll be from the 9th of December through to the 9th of January. And the draft engagement questionnaire is at Appendix 1 of the paper this morning. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Sue and Tom. I'm assuming that's it on the in terms of presentation. Thank you very much. I understand there is an amendment to this, to these recommendations. Steve, would you like to propose it? And have you got a seconder?
Yes, thank you, Chair. And my seconder is Councillor Goldsack. So the recommendation that I wish to amend is B, approve the plans for engagement and consultation with residents and key stakeholders, and the amendment is add an additional new question at number 6 into the business planning engagement questions on page 121 of the agenda pack. And that question to be, would you support a revised business plan proposal that requires no increase in council tax? Yes, no, unsure. And just speaking to the amendment, Chair, the reason behind this is if you have an honest consultation, you want to hear what residents think about your proposals and perhaps what they think would be a good idea. The only question that regards council tax in this, so there's a 2% proposal on the table, is would you support going to the max? Now, we know pre-election that people like myself said, if you vote for Labour or Liberal Democrats, they will tax the max every year that they're in. And that was denied at the time. It has actually proved to be the case at the time. We've heard nationally the same argument about a general election where we said the moment Labour would get in, they would raise tax to the maximum possible amount that they could. And yesterday we heard £40 billion worth of tax increases that were previously, oh, we won't be increasing tax. So I think it's important that we give residents a voice. And that voice is, do they actually want to see the state increase in size or be handled in this way where it ends up in an ever increasing tax increase? Or is it possible that they would accept a different kind of service delivery model that would require zero? And whether this administration wants to progress with that is a time that comes at the budget. That's when you decide what you're going to do your tax. And this is only for information to see what the public think. And I think it's incumbent on us to ask two ends of the spectrum, not just one. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Steve. And I've noted your seconder. Would anybody like to debate this amendment? Graham?
Thank you, Chair. I'm a bit confused about this additional question. The existing question says, would you support an increase in council tax of up to 4.99% to maintain or improve essential services such as social care or highways and road maintenance? If someone were to ask me, do I support an increase of 0% without anything else, I'm bound to say yes. I would have thought that at the very least, in order to maintain an honest consultation, as Steve described it, we should include what the consequences are of a 0% increase. And that could be raiding reserves, or it could be cutting services. But at the moment, that's not clear.
Thank you, Graham. Okay, Steve.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you've really read it, Councillor Wilson, because it says, would you support a revised business plan proposal that requires no? Now, it's impossible at this stage to say exactly what it means, but anybody reading that would know that you can't have exactly the same. So that's why it says, would you agree to a revised business plan proposal? Thank you.
Edna, did you want to speak?
I was going to make a substantially the same comment as Councillor Wilson, but I would add that the thrust of I would go further and say the thrust of the question that is there is describing what a council tax increase of up to 4.99% means, and to have 0% without any context around it is deeply misleading. So I would really argue against this. Thank you.
Thank you, Edna. Richard, you were next.
Well, again, very briefly, nice try by the opposition. And I think they're rehearsing an argument that we'll be having quite a few times between now and next February. And I personally am deeply proud to be sitting here the morning after a government has been honest with the electorate and said that if we want decent public services and we want to ensure that the people delivering them are treated with dignity, then we have to pay for them and we have to find that money from somewhere. And that's as true for this council as it is for national government. So I might be tempted to vote for this amendment if it said how many social workers we'd be sacking, or how many fewer children with disabilities would get educational care and health plans, or how many libraries we would be closing, or how many extra potholes and pavements and faulty street lights wouldn't be repaired, then it would be a balanced question. But the idea that the electorate of Cambridgeshire know our jargon, that business planning would have to be revised. You know, if you're going to a playgroup or you're in need of household support, the idea that people would have any idea whatsoever what that meant is fanciful. So I won't be voting for this amendment.
Thank you, Richard. Lorna, did you want to speak?
Yes, please. Councillor Count has talked about the need for an honest consultation, and I agree with that we do need honesty in consultations, and that includes realism and practicality. It is a well-known truism that if you ask people, do you want low taxes, they will say yes. If you ask them, do you want high levels of services, they will say yes. And those two need to be joined up somewhere. And just asking people whether they don't want a tax increase without, as has been said by other speakers, explaining what that would mean, is fundamentally dishonest. You might as well offer everybody a free owl, you know, with their council tax bill. The question then is, how do you service that? We know very well that, like every other council, upper tier council in this country, we are suffering huge pressures in spending, particularly in the areas of adult social care and children with disabilities and special educational needs. Now, we might argue that it's just as well that there are going to be more buses on our roads so that we can throw more of those people under them. I'm not in favour of that. But either we throw them under the bus, and that will be difficult because we have statutory obligations as well as moral obligations, and I wouldn't want to do that. And I don't think my colleagues on this side would. Or we would have to decide which other services, non-statutory, we would have to close down in order to ensure that people were getting their zero council tax increase. And that is the thing that we need to be honest about, all of us. We have seen at national and at local level the consequences of Tory fantasy budgets. This is another Tory fantasy budget idea, and I just don't think it's an honest thing to do to our electorate. Thank you.
Thank you, Lorna. Is there anything else on the amendment? Mark?
This is me coming back as a seconder, yeah?
I don't know that we are that formal during
Well, okay,
meetings, but you
well,
can
then
come
I'll-
back at least once. Mark.
I would like to add just a little bit. I recognise largely what's been said across the floor, and can go with some of the things that's said. But let's go back to Councillor Howart's analogy of the playgroup or the preschool setting that has now got to pay an increase in all of their wages. So unfortunately, they'll be looking at their budgets very tightly and probably looking at their business plans to see how many people they can employ and move forward next year. They're then going to be messing themselves about their rates that are going to come in, and their rates are going to come in at 4.9% higher because you say that they are. You know, there's no doubt, there's no view of what else. So I kind of agree that we need to understand what business plan could come forward with 0%. I agree, but that's not the point. The point of this midterm review here is to have a look and say, what would it look like, and would you vote for it? Yeah, turkeys wouldn't vote for Christmas. I understand the arguments that Councillor Dupre put up. I get that, and we can all use analogies further like the buses one. But I think in this case, it's about giving a real, honest alternative to our ward members. And I do agree with Councillor Howard, Richard, on a point that I think sometimes we get tied up in our jargon and we expect people out there to understand it. I can take that. So very, very clear on this. And that is, would you support a revised review of what could be done proposal that requires no increase in council tax? And that's called a business plan. So I'll go back to the owners of these small businesses who are now terrified about their affordability of being able to exist. But just go back to that one thing, because I didn't hear in the budget yesterday that free school places that are given out to parents have gone up in costs to allow the small businesses running these preschool areas to be able to afford their rates bills. So for that, I am fully in support of this amendment.
Mark, thank you for that. I mean, there are two problems with this amendment. One is a bit small in the sense that, you know, we could ask that question 4.99% times, you know, would you support 0? Would you support 1? Would you support 2? I mean, for goodness sake. The problem is there is a reason why the baseline business plan assumes 2% rather than 0. The baseline business plan assumes 2% because that's the ring-fenced adult social care precept. So by not having that, you would be having to find £8 million upwards of savings in the adults and social care department. So you can't just say we can just do, and by the way, no, the business plan is not a review of could be done. That's absolutely not what it is, and we know that. So I don't think that this amendment actually has anything at all for it. We have a question about whether or not people would like to pay more tax to get more services. It's the easiest way to ask the question. It's already in there. So I can't really recommend that anybody supports this, but we will certainly have this debate again and again and again, and that's what we should do. So on the amendment, before we carry on and we resume the discussion, we should probably take a vote. Hello, Chris, Councillor Bowden, very, very happy to see you. Sorry that you were late. Would you like to speak now?
Only to apologise for being late. I had an urgent flooding meeting with Anglian Water and Cambridgeshire County Council in my division, so my apologies for being late.
That is absolutely no problem. You are just in time to vote on your colleague's amendment on the business plan paper, which I propose that we do now. Everybody in favour, please raise your hands. Give a bit of time for Michelle to have a look. Everything good? Everybody against, please raise your hands. Again, please give Michelle a bit of time to have a look. I think she's well practiced. Are there any abstentions? I see none. Michelle?
Chair, the result of the vote is 5 votes in favour, 9 against, no abstentions. The amendment is therefore lost.
Thank you very much, Michelle, for that. I propose to resume from where we were. There is still the substance of the paper to be debated. Before we debate, does anybody have any questions of clarification for either Tom or Sue about the papers in front of us? And the review, not the review, and the questionnaire, which was attached with these papers. Just in case, stick around, Tom and Sue, as I know you will, just in case things come forward later. Any comments for the general debate from anybody? Steve, start with you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So one of the comments I've got to make is, seeing as this is the start of the strategic process here, and the date of this meeting was moved to here, when we knew that the budget was the 31st of October and we would never get any detail by then, it might have been appropriate just to give us another week or two to actually have something meaningful in front of us, because it is, as Sue quite rightly said, it is the situation we know at present. And unfortunately, we know it all changed last night. One of the things that hasn't really been highlighted very much is the 2% efficiency savings that the Labour government is imposing. And we've yet to see how that plays out. Now, that could be as much as 20 million pounds. But we'll have to see how that unwinds when we get the devil of the detail, as the chief exec referred to. In terms of the strategic framework, the recommendations, etc., let me be clear. This is your strategic framework. This is your business plan. This is not a Conservative business plan. It is not our strategic framework. And therefore, everything that interrelates with from one to the other, apart from technical details, is not what we are supporting and not the way we would be moving forward. So on that basis, as we've done in previous years, you will hear our plans at full budget in terms of an amendment, but I won't be supporting a strategic framework going as it is, because simply it isn't ours. Thank you, Chair.
Steve, thank you very much for that. I'll go around the table once first. So Graham.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a minor question about the consultation document. It asks which district you live in and what is your age, but it doesn't ask whether you're male, female, or prefer not to say, and it doesn't ask which services you currently experience. And I just wonder whether those are helpful questions to include or not.
Thank you, Graham. I did have a request from Stephen to have a clarification. Maybe Sue would like to start with this one and then we go back to Stephen.
Yes, thank you. And we have tried to keep the profile questions quite succinct in this questionnaire because we do have the quality of life survey as well, which we'll hear about in a moment. So in terms of which services people use and the response to those services, we have that information coming through the quality of life survey. So we've tried to complement this and really focus a set of questions on council priorities, but we could take away and consider whether we should, increase the questions around profile. But really the quality of life survey gives us a rich set of complementary information in that regard.
Thank you. So I will say that superficially, that sounds like a very good point, and I would like us to think about it going forward. There is a difficulty in, so I'm assuming that we are meeting the basic EDI requirements of monitoring, but it is possibly tempting to go into too much detail about exactly who people are and exactly what they do. When it comes to asking people some specific preferences about what kind of level of tax they want to pay and what kind of level of services they want to. So it is a risky business, but I am willing to consider that we should talk about it. For the moment, this is a very basic statutory tool, and I'm assuming it's being composed in that way. Stephen, did you want to come in at this point?
Thank you, Chair. Two things, actually, just building on your comments and then back to the point Councillor Count raised about the 2% productivity and efficiency savings that were outlined in the budget yesterday. On the first point, the questions have been designed in accordance with the Council's own consultation and engagement strategy, the refreshed version of which you have for consideration later on the agenda, and fully observes the requirements set out in the gunning principles. So our monitoring officer has seen and approved this as well, as you would expect. On the point Councillor Count helpfully raised earlier about the 2% productivity and efficiency savings that were outlined in the budget yesterday, whilst those targets are being allocated to main spending departments in government, we do not as yet understand how that may or may not trickle down to local government or other forms of local public services. So at this stage only, we understand that to apply to central government departments, but of course, as we know, the way the funding works its way down to local government, there could be a consequential impact. Clearly, we will assess and analyse that as part of the preparation of the papers for December's meeting of this committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. That's very helpful. Now, can you raise your hand again if you wanted to speak, because I've forgotten where we were. Are there any further comments? I see none. That would be interesting. Are there really no further comments? In which case, I'm going to start making some concluding remarks, and we see how we get to. This is an intermediate state in the process of the business planning setting, which, as we all know, because we've all done it a few times, both in opposition and in control, is a very complicated matter. There are very many things to consider, and at the moment we are staring down, the remarks that were made yesterday. So first of all, there was one thing I wanted to come back on, which was on the specific matter of whether this meeting was convened to coincide with the budget. It wasn't. It was put back by 1 week because of the LGA conference being rearranged. Otherwise, it would have happened a week ago. It wasn't meant to consider the Chancellor's budget. It wasn't meant to be in time for that. We will consider the implications of the budget, I suppose, either at the next date of this meeting, or, I mean, we're going to need a few weeks, I think, first of all, for the information to percolate. So whilst it's tempting to think of these papers in the light of the budget, they were considered to be drafted before the budget was even being announced. So hopefully that clarifies things. But in terms of the comments that were made yesterday about the 2% efficiency savings, I mean, look at the amount of savings that we are staring down the barrel of. We've got 40 million pounds that we're short of. And we know we've known for many, many years the kind of county that we live in. We know the level of pressure that there is on our service, and we know the levels of demand that rise. The way that the demography in our county is changing. We've just approved the paper that essentially unlocks infrastructure to service 11,000 new homes over the next 5 years in one location. And this is replicated all over the shop. We have got some serious long-term considerations to make, and this is part of what this year's process is about. there is frantic work going on behind the scenes in terms of finding the way in which these £40 million will be found. We've got to find them. We are legally obliged to do so. And whilst we are legally obliged to find these £40 million, we are equally morally and statutorily obliged to look after people that are in our care. So that's the circle we've got to square. And actually, you know, I'm not making absolutely any apology for the business decisions that this administration has taken over the last 3 years. It is open to the opposition to have all the support that they want in presenting a business plan with 0% council tax. They've had 3 years to do it. They still haven't done it. So, you know, maybe next year will be the one that we look at. I will be extremely pleased to look at it and consider it when it comes forward. But we have got stuff that is real in front of us and we can't ignore it. With those comments having been made, we have got recommendations in front of us. So we have got a process and timelines for setting the business plan from 25-26 to 29-30 that we should approve. I would be interested in why the opposition doesn't want to vote for this, but it's just the process and timelines. The plans for engagement, which we've talked about, and delegate any amendments requested by the committee to the Executive Director of Finance and Resources and other members of the team in consultation with Chair and Vice Chair. I get the feeling I should take an actual vote on these recommendations. First of all, are we happy to take the recommendations on block? Or in which case we'll do that. Can I have everyone in favour, please? Excellent. Can we have everyone against? All good, Michelle? I haven't seen any abstentions. There are no abstentions, I don't think. Michelle?
Chair, the result of the vote is 9 votes in favour, 5 against, no abstentions. The motion is therefore carried.
Thank you, Michelle, and thanks everyone for your contributions. This will come back to us again and again and again until February. So I look forward to discussing the business plan more. Yes, Mark.
Can I make a point of order on the general thing? We don't appear to be linked up and plugged in for our technical equipment.
Oh, we don't in fact appear to be
No,
plugged in.
so
I did
I
mention
know it's
that
Councillor
earlier.
Dupre. So I think this may be the reason. None of them.
Is that where it goes? It's
Well, not my desk. They're not plugged in, but that may cause an issue as we go through the. So I don't know whether you want to make a short break to get it fixed, or whether everybody can survive on battery power. I just don't want.
Would it be possible for somebody in attendance to try and find someone from IT whilst we carry on the meeting?
Chair is facilities management, not
Oh,
IT. So
right, sorry.
I know Michelle has raised.
Due for a break at 12. I'm hoping that somebody has notified facilities and something is being done. I would propose that we carry on until 12. We really are pushed for time today. I'm so sorry about that. But I did notice when I came in, there is a magic point over there that does work. Sorry, Michelle, I've already stolen it. But somebody will, in the next hour, I'm sure somebody will sort something out. But thank you for that, Mark. I didn't realize how widespread it was. Item number 7, the quality of life survey. Now, we have got the Policy and Insight Manager, Rachel, with us today. Thank you very much for coming. Would you like to introduce the report, please?
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, members. The Quality of Life Survey continues to provide valuable insight into the experience of our residents across Cambridgeshire as part of the Council's commitment to be an evidence-led organisation. The paper today provides contextual evidence in the form of the key findings from the 2024 survey for the committee to consider in the context of the business plan and budget approach for 2025-26. Just as a brief reminder, this is the second year of the survey, and Think Insights were again commissioned to undertake this survey for us. And this year we were partnered with the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Combined Authority, South Cambridgeshire District Council and Cambridgeshire Head. The survey, which ran from May to July this year, reached 5,500 residents. And just as a reminder, a sampling approach was used to ensure that the survey reached 1,100 residents in each of the districts and that those residents surveyed were representative of the residential population based on the most recent census data. As the paper highlights, most of Cambridgeshire's residents continue to feel happy and safe in the county. However, this is not the case for all of our residents, and the findings highlight residents' concerns around road and pavement maintenance, cost of living, mental health and loneliness, in particular amongst our younger residents, and climate change. The survey findings have already been used to feed into the newly updated strategic framework in item 8 of the committee today, and as well as providing important contextual information to support the shaping of the business plan decisions. The information will also provide evidence to support the delivery of our future council change strategy presented in item 9 of this committee today. Today, the committee is asked to note the key findings of the 2024 survey and consider the implications of these findings for the council's strategic framework ambitions and business plan and budget setting process. Thank you.
Rachel, thank you very much for coming. And before we move on, can I just say just how amazing these reports always are and just how wonderful they are to read. I'm going to have to say this a few times, so I'm going to start now because it really, really is an amazing, amazing piece of work, which as an administration, I'm very proud that we initiated and that we're doing. And I'm extremely grateful to you and your team for the hard work that you've done. And as I said, I want to say this a few times, so I'm going to start now. Are there any questions for Rachel? I've seen a couple on this side, but we'll start with Mark and Steve. Hang on a second. Are there any questions for Rachel from both either of you? Oh, well, I have. Okay, we'll start on that side for this moment. Lorna, did you want to start? No, you didn't. In which case, I saw that wrong. Steve, would you like to go first? Oh, sorry, Rachel. You know, but put your hands up.
I'm a shrinking violet. You can barely see me, but it's a comment or a question. So should I wait?
Just ask first. I mean, Rachel, please stay with us until the end of the debate. But can I just ask if there are actually any questions for Rachel at this point? I see none, in which case, I'll tell you what, let's start with the debate. Go on, Richard.
I'm going to try and improve my confidence levels. Thank you for your encouragement. Firstly, I think this is probably the most important report we see each year. I think the way that we developed for the first time last year, the Quality of Life Survey, is fantastic and is giving us really rich information, and that for our partners. Last year, we saw the desperately high levels of mental health difficulties. And then when in our business planning, we put some extra money, not enough, of course, but as much as we could afford. And we now have better crisis response compared with how we were before. And we've helped local voluntary organisations of people experiencing mental health issues set up around the county, bottom up, meeting needs as they're found. And that was all a direct response to the Quality of Life Survey. And I'm deeply proud of that. We still see in this one that particularly for young people, there is a mental health crisis. So we've got to carry on looking at that very, very hard. But it does show that this isn't just a paper exercise and then it's business as usual, but we really study the results and look and see how we can how we can adapt to them. In terms of the findings this year, the fact that half of people say they're having to have the heating on less than they need it to be on, and a quarter of the people say they can't get the food they need, that is desperately bad. And it means everything that we're doing on anti-poverty is so needed. The fact that there are very high levels and increasing support for action on climate change is a very strong endorsement of what this council is trying to do on the environment. I don't see in this report, but I'm sure I will be shown later, the specific responses about adult social care under my committee's chairpersonship. I don't necessarily want to hear that today, actually, because I think you'll be doing this committee by committee and you can't do it for everyone in one report. But I just say to members here, last year it was lower than some, but it's not a universal service, and therefore people don't rate it if they don't use it. And so people look at things that everyone can use, like a library. And so That's not to make excuses, but it's to understand there's a structural difference there when we ask the question. And so what we should be looking at hard is the comparison with last year, and also looking in the context of the user satisfaction surveys that we do. And finally, this very, very interesting finding about loneliness, that people in Cambridgeshire are far more lonely than people elsewhere. What a challenging finding that is. Absolutely no easy answers to it at all. But we should all be reflecting and thinking, and we should be talking with our officers about that. And I have a hunch that what we're trying to do in terms of integrated neighbourhood care together, closer to communities, trying to build our service in a way that we engage with networks at the very local level and help those networks to be nourished and developed. I think that can be part of the solution, that we as a council can affect that. But I do think that we need to think about that and reflect upon it in the time ahead. And it wouldn't be without this survey that perhaps that would be given such prominence. So I'd like to thank the officers very much indeed.
Richard, thank you very much for that. And I'm sure Rachel will take away your comments about, we can go in depth as much as we want. That's one of the wonders of this thing, just how in depth you can go on everything by choice. And I propose every committee takes the time to do that, because it's going to be extremely valuable and dare I say the point. I saw a request from Philippa. Did you want to speak, Philippa?
Yes, it turns out to be a footnote to Councillor Howitt in terms of just a I am reminded, I'm just a substitute here, but I'm reminded this is the big picture. But last night I was at at a Care Leavers celebration, and this issue reminds me in terms of the it's page 125 3.3, as Councillor Howitt was referring to, the mental health issues suffered by some of our young people. We are obviously concerned for our children, our grandchildren, our grandchildren's friends, our children's friends, lots of people we know, but we are particularly responsible for the children in care and the care leavers who, are based in Cambridgeshire. And while celebrating what we have been able to do for them in terms of helping mental health and their travel into adult life with mentoring that we commission, I would be very, very concerned if I thought we had to cut that back. I would rather expand it, and that is the budget in action. And cuts, if they come, could be on that sort of thing, which can make such a difference to individual young people who are our responsibility. Sorry, that sounded a bit preachy, but it's an important part of our lives as corporate parents to think about them going into adulthood. Thank you.
Thank you, Philippa. Mark.
Thank you, Chair. I welcome the quality of life survey. I think it is a good piece of work, and congratulate the officers for what they do. I also welcome the comments from my colleagues opposite that they truly take this on board and action it, which is why I'm a little bit sad when last year we had a quality of life report survey where our ward members completely castigated the position on roads and pavements. And this one again this year is exactly the same. And I'm just going to share a live example with you. Last Friday, the deputy chair of Highways joined the senior director of Highways, myself and a ward member on a road called Great Fen Road between Isleham and Soham. 2 days before that meeting, which I first asked for over 18 months ago. 18 months ago. For 18 months, we haven't had an active local highways officer. I asked the local highways officer to go and check this road because I thought it was dangerous. Do you know what she did as a result after 18 months of inactivity? She's put traffic lights up to reduce the flow of traffic to single lane, not double lane, because in her opinion, there was a threat. Now, this is the kind of stuff that isn't happening because the way our highways is led and driven. Now, I understand there's 500 million coming out for peat damaged roads from the government. We want 300 million of that. Right? That's the figure that we want. But we must be doing more for this. Now, I'm going to touch on the pavement issues as well. I think Richard Howitt is absolutely right to highlight loneliness and say what a challenge that is, a real challenge. In our rural communities, even more of a challenge because there's less opportunity to meet. And in our rural communities, do you know, the elderly and infirm daren't go out because of the trip hazards presented by our paths. Fact. This is what they're telling me. They won't walk round to the local co-op in my village because the state of the paths are so bad. Now, I have had director after director out and walk these paths, and we're still saying the same issues. I have had so many people report these on Report It, and it's just not coming through. And I don't know what else to do other than drag Councillor Shayler, who was kind enough to come out last week, and the now acting director for highways, and say, look, what can I tell my ward members? Please, this is unsafe and unfair. So please do take note of the quality of life survey. There's some fantastic information on there, and please do so, as you say, Chair, at all committees, right? And please get your dreadful leader of the Highways and Transport Committee to take it seriously and not give us the smile that says, I'm in control. Thank you.
Mark, thank you for that. I am sure that every committee will want to do that, and I'm pleased you got some action in the end. I know that we have more action that we need than we are able to do as quickly as we can, but I think one of the points of this is that we are trying to turn a corner, and this is going to tell us at some point when the corner has been turned. I'll carry on. Steve, did you want to speak now?
Thank you, Chair. My question, well, I did have a question. Sorry for the confusion that was caused, but I did have a question. In terms of satisfaction, what is the lowest scoring satisfaction, please?
Rachel, can you maybe got that?
Apologies, Councillor Count. You mean on the services? That's roads and pavement maintenance.
Thank you for that, Chair. I think Councillor Goldsack has already been talking about the dissatisfaction with the highways and pavements. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because we've just had a debate on the strategic framework going out. And in that, there was a consultation question which said, would residents be happy with paying more council tax up to the maximum of 4.99% if it actually meant improvements to things like your highways and pavements? And then we sit here and we listen to the joint administration telling them how vital it is, this piece of work on consultation, the quality of life survey is, because it helps inform their decision making. And yet they go out to the public and say the only way we're going to consider changing, we won't change any of our priorities, because let's face it, the joint administration does operate services that are above the mandatory minimum levels. So there are choices that they can make, but the only way that anybody's going to get those improvements on highways and pavements, which is the number one priority for the residents, is if they're prepared to pay more rather than have this joint administration actually consider that the public are right about what they want their council to deliver. And it goes further than that. When I look at the actual press release, the actual page that is on the website, currently live at the moment, about the quality of life survey reports, bullet point number 3, the only negative bit, however, as with last year, it's not a perfect picture for everyone. As in 23, some groups are more likely to feature having concerns with quality of life: young people, renters, disabled residents, blah, 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 blah. Residents' concerns about cost of living, jobs, investment, climate change are increasing. And yet we hear the number one dissatisfaction, highways and pavements, didn't make it into that press, didn't make it onto the page. Why is that? I'll tell you why it is: because it is not this joint administration's priority. It is the public's priority, but it's not the joint administration. It comes last in the queue compared to everything else, because you know better, you think you know better, and you decide what's going to happen. And this quality of life survey has come screaming at you 2 years in a row. We need more here than anything else. And yet, whilst you've given a slight amount more and said, oh, well, here you go. And as we heard, the chair of highways always smiling, telling us how well he's doing, the public are calling you out on this. Last year, again, you voted down the Conservative amendment to spend more on highways. Every year you do that. You just go with what you're doing, and the public are still telling you the same thing. So whilst I think this is an excellent piece of work, I think the way it's being abused by the joint administration is actually reproachable. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. I'll come back to some of that. I'll come back to some of that, but I think I've got more interventions, so I'll go around the table again. Lorna, did you want to speak?
Yes, I did. I do think this is an excellent piece of work. I thought so last year, and I think so this year as well. And it is a really important one. I do think that the important thing we need to do with it is not just have a report about it saying, has this gone up, has this gone down? The important thing is the golden thread that goes from the results of those surveys to what can we do about it? Now, what can we do about it? In many cases will be very different. There are some things that I think we can do that are practical, affordable, and may well make a difference. There are some things that we need to work with our partners to do, in which case we need conversations with them. There are some things that it is going to be very difficult to do. Councillor Goldsack earlier mentioned the 300 million of the 500 million announced in the budget that we alone could use up on mending our highways, which I am very aware is a priority of my residents in my patch. And we can't say to the government, well, we're having 300 million of your 500 million, please, because that isn't going to happen. The question is, how do we continue to press the case at governmental level? How do we bend the combined authorities' power and heft to that task? What are the things we can do, desperately underfunded as we are, facing a massive backlog of not just years but decades of neglect? What do we do when we have infrastructure that it is massively expensive per kilometre to put right? And when we have many, many kilometres, particularly in my patch, we have kilometres of road leading to half a dozen properties in a lot of cases. And how do you balance that need against the need to put right some of our major A roads and big, heavy traffic carrying non-trunk roads? So those questions aren't easy. And it's not just a question of saying, oh, yes, a lot of people are dissatisfied with highways, therefore we are going to wave some magic wand and sort that out. We did, in the budget in February, spend a lot more on highways than has been spent for a long, long time. Some of that is beginning to see an effect. There's been a major piece of work not too far from me on one of those damaged roads, and there's going to be another one in January, February elsewhere. But we have a lot to get through with not much money. We need a fairer funding settlement that has been denied for year upon year. The government, I'm going to cut them a bit of slack. I won't cut them too much slack. And so, you know, next year, the year after, I think the questions will get rather more strident. But they have a legacy that they've got to sort out. But I, and I'm sure other members of the Joint Administration, will be on their case about the things that are needed in this county. And we will need resource to put some of those things right that are in the quality of life survey. But just because we don't have the money doesn't mean we're not mindful of those things. And where we do have the money and the resource and the partners to make those things work, that's where we need to be putting that into our planning, business planning process. And I am sure we will. Thank you.
Lorna, thank you for that. Peter, I think, was next.
Just 2 quick points, because I think Mark, I can't remember the exact words Mark used, but sort of suggested that, you know, we'd looked at the quality of life survey, looked at reference to, you know, paths and roads, and then ignored it. I just looked up the capital programme. So if we take just South Cambridgeshire, to be a little bit parochial, there are more than 20 programmes in here, and footway resurfacing. I slightly hesitate to go into the detail because I think we should do that at Highways Committee. The other thing that my residents have really welcomed is, you know, for the first time, we're now regularly scanning both the highways themselves and the paths. So we've just generated a report and a 2-year review in one of my villages that looks specifically at the condition of the path. And the response from the parish council was, well, we never had a process before of looking at the state of the pass and where work needs to be done. So I just wouldn't accept Mark's characterization that somehow we take the survey, the quality of life survey, and then completely ignore its outputs. That's not the case. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. I had Chris next.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair. I think Councillor Dupre was entirely correct in saying that this report should not be an item in isolation, but should lead to other things. What it should lead to, in my opinion, is a careful evaluation or re-evaluation of priorities. That's not to say it's the only thing which should be taken into account when deciding on priorities, but clearly it should be one of the things which is taken into account. And there can be no doubt at all from this report and the previous year's report that so far as the people of Cambridge is concerned, the greatest dissatisfaction that they've got with the performance of this council is on highways. But that dissatisfaction isn't evenly spread across Cambridgeshire. The last figures that I saw on the split within Cambridgeshire showed, for example, that the dissatisfaction in Fenland is twice as great as the dissatisfaction in Cambridge City when it comes to the state of our roads. And that may not be surprising, given that this administration has, on a systematic basis, significantly increased the amount of spend on road repair in Cambridge City in the budget, and has significantly decreased the amount of road repair money in the budget for Fenland. And it's something which I'm bringing now to the attention. There's no use, Councillor Hewitt, just shaking his head, because the numbers are clear, correct, and were obtained through a Freedom of Information request, interestingly, by Councillor Anna Bailey fairly recently, in a very clear way. And people in my area are not dissatisfied, they are furious. So in my area, we have absolute traffic chaos, with 3 of the 5 roads out of our town being blocked, either fully blocked or partially blocked by temporary traffic lights or full roadworks at the moment. The full roadworks, which we've currently got blocked on the B1040, going north and going into Peterborough, we've had temporary traffic lights there for 8 months before the works started. And it's been absolutely outrageous that it's taken that long for money to be found, an organisation to be put in place for clearly necessary works to take place. On the new bridge which has been built over King's Dyke going into Peterborough from Whittlesea, the road was closed off 4 months ago. Half of it, one of the 2 carriageways was closed off, and temporary traffic lights have been put in place. That was done 4 months ago, and County Council announced it would be for a week. They're still there 4 months later. People are queuing for 25, 30, 35 minutes a day to get into and out of Whittlesea for work. It is an outrageous position, and the anger, it's not dissatisfaction, it's not just a matter of simple quality of life, the anger that there is at this administration in Cambridgeshire County Council for what they have not done, what they've failed to do, and what they're still failing to do as far as the highways is concerned, is absolutely palpable. And it's not surprising that these figures are as poor as they are, and it will be interesting to see if Councillor Dupre's challenge to you is actually met. Councillor Dupre's challenge is this survey should link in some ways to the prioritisation that you have as an administration. You have deprioritised highways. You failed to support the Conservative amendments to the budget to give greater prioritisation to highways for the last 2 years. I suspect that the same will happen again this year. I hope to be pleasantly surprised. I hope that you will actually learn from what's happening around the county, and I hope that you will actually increase the amount of money significantly that is spent on highways. But again, that's a matter for the administration's prioritisation. And if you fail to learn this lesson, I fear that the electorate will teach you a lesson come next May.
Chris, thank you very much for that. Is there anything else? I think I've gone through every hand so far. David.
Just a comment, Chair. Thank you. Just a comment. I think if I read the report correctly, there's 1,200 responses. There's an adult population in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough of 16 to 64-year-olds of 570,000. Is this really a true representation is this good enough to say that 1,200 responses we can actually guide our council on these 1,200 responses. The responses I see here, we could see these by just looking out the window or talking to the members around the table. I think we're wasting our money. There we are.
Thank you, David. Rachel, did you want to say anything about the statistical analysis of the response and whether it's representative? Because my understanding is that it is.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I can do. I'm not sure if, sorry, just to clarify on the 1,200, that's.
Read it wrong, please tell me. I don't mind being told I'm wrong. I'm just saying here, it says here a total of 1,231 responses from the various ways you went for the responses, for sending out the surveys, whether they be online or written.
Thank you for clarifying. The 1,200 responses were to a general public survey link. So the survey came in well, almost 3 parts. One was a stratified sample survey that we did. That was 5,500 residents.
Yeah, I assumed you got from the 5,500, you got 1,200 responses.
I'm sorry, I will take Stephen, and then I think if we've got any more arguing over numbers, we probably want to do that after the meeting. But
Chair, thank you to Councillor Ambrose Smith. Perhaps just to help clarify, this survey is focused on the delivery of 5,500 direct interviews with 1,100 people in each of the 5 district areas of Cambridgeshire. It is statistically significant. It's undertaken by an independent market research company who is experienced in doing this and has a stratified and segmented group chosen each year. They don't interview the same people each year. The 1,200 or so responses are in addition to the 5,500 that were already sampled directly through telephone interviews. Those 1,200 responses were in open response to making this survey available through the County Council's website. So in effect, it's 5,500 plus 1,200 creating the responses that you have in front of you today. The 5,500 is the baseline, and that requires 1,100 responses in each of the 5 districts, which I suspect was what Rachel might have been trying to get to.
Thank you very much for that clarification. But still, I ask, is 5,000, is 6,000 sufficient out of 5,570,000? I heard what you said regarding statistical reporting, yes.
thank you. And if there are detailed questions about the statistical methods, can I encourage people to get answers separately from this meeting? Mark.
If you allow me to come back in on another point, I'll be very grateful. Thank you, Chair. On page 147, ambition 2, this is the kind of thing that I think is misleading to our public, because point 1 says maintained over 4,600 kilometres of carriageway. We have 4,600 kilometres of carriageway in Cambridgeshire. My point is they've not been maintained. That's the point here. So we are telling people in this ambition subject that we have maintained them. I'm telling that we didn't have an LHO in our area for the last 2 years, virtually zero work other than that's been done by a borrowed person from the neighbouring patch has come in. And we've certainly got pathways and roads that just haven't seen attention. And I willingly bring up a picture for everybody to see of the report it system with the amount of unfulfilled items that have been reported on there. So that's my point. That's just one line in here that's not correct. We haven't maintained them. We have the responsibility for. That's very different.
Thank you, Mark. Are there any further comments? So in conclusion, there are just a few things. It is not, of course, surprising to anyone around this table that there is quite a lot of attention paid to the areas of lowest satisfaction. We knew that last year, we know that, and we know that this year. It's not surprising to anybody. I utterly and absolutely reject any implication that we deprioritize highways. It's not only at the forefront of our mind, everything we do. The pressure on that service are insane. 15 years of absolutely savage cuts that we've had to deal with. Turning this ship around is going to take longer than the last 3 years. And I take it only very slightly, perhaps facetiously, that we're getting anger about the fact that works aren't done. And to prove that, look at all the queues because of all the road work we're doing. I mean, guys, this is how you fix roads. And we are trying, and we know that we need probably the entire budget that has been announced for the country by the Chancellor yesterday. We need the entirety of it in Cambridgeshire. We're not going to get it, but you're going to have to start somewhere. And the amount of investment of the last 2 years into highways absolutely dwarfs everything that's been done in the last 15 years. I remember fighting the election 5 years ago. The number in total over the previous 5 years were piddling. So don't nobody give me anything of that, because I will absolutely, absolutely not take it. There is obviously a broader picture, because these things are interconnected. People feel lonely and alienated and sad, and there is a mental health crisis, especially within the young people cohort. And this is desperately worrying, because these are people who are moving away from home. And, you know, the demographics really clearly shows that there are very specific parts of the county where the average age of the population is going up. And there are some very specific parts of the country where the age of the population is going down. And how you deal with the difference in the movement of young people and the plans that they make for their life, and how difficult or easy it is for them to make appropriate plans for their life, is something that is going to consume us. And it involves, yes, of course, them traveling on roads. So, you know, it's all interconnected. We are going to need a bit more time in order for this to go in parallel, as it will do eventually, to an action plan that says, this is where the response was 5 years ago, this is where the response is now. So I do hope that this is going to continue with the level of detail that it has been done so far, because that's the only way to actually get the kind of information that Lorna's after, which we are all after. She's speaking for the administration when she says that it is not her own only personal concern. We all want this to turn into, look at how we've turned this number around, but you got to start somewhere. So this is where we are, this is where we're going, and we will see more money from all our capital and revenue resources going into highways continuously, because we know they need it. But there is absolutely no point anybody complaining we're doing less than they are, because that's completely not correct. In terms of the actual report, it is only to us for noting. So I am assuming that everybody around this table is in favor of noting it. And please do take away the action, dig as deep as you possibly can and take it to your committee, because these are going to be things that are going to accompany us for the next few years. Shall I take the report as noted? Thank you very much, everyone, for the discussion. This was a very important item, and I wanted to do it justice, and I think we have. We've got 15 minutes until our next break. Let's make them count. We are exactly halfway through the agenda, which is not exactly where I wanted to be, but it was important that we deal with these items in the way that we have. Item number 8, the strategic framework. Sue, could I get you to take it away?
Thank you very much, Chair. We've made reference to this strategic framework a number of times during the committee this morning. What you have in front of you is the updated version of the framework, because it is an important document which sets out the strategic direction of the council and obviously is key to our business planning for this next period. In the refresh, we have included updated information from the Quality of Life survey and also set out further progress the council's made in delivering its ambitions. The refresh also includes a summary of the council's change strategy, which we'll be considering later on in the committee today, and a new page as well on a partnership shared ambition, which has been developed over recent months and which will inform our joint working with those partners who are listed in the document in the coming years. Thank you, Chair.
Sue, thank you very much for that. Are there any questions for Sue? I'm going to try and spot the hands, even if people are shy with them. I see no hands. Are there any points for debate? Any comments? Yes, Chris.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair. This strategic framework sets out the priorities, the ambitions that there is of the joint administration. It shouldn't be a surprise that not everyone on the other side of the chamber agrees with those, but that's a matter of politics. And a democratic election took place 3 years ago. The joint administration decided on their priorities. And if the people of Cambridgeshire decide that they want different ambitions and different policies, that will be up to them in an election. I'm not complaining about the way in which this has been structured necessarily, more the underlying assumptions which there are within it, which is fine. That's just a matter of reasonable debate. But there is a point which I will raise, which is, I think, quite fundamental in terms of, I'm coming back to this idea of prioritization again, and of really concentrating on what people both want and need. And I'm going to make a comment about the chief executive's forward. I wouldn't normally do this, but the chief executive is big enough and ugly enough to be able to defend himself. He's at a senior enough level that he can do that, and he knows that I don't mean this personally against him. But I think that what really demonstrates what is wrong about this administration as well is the comment which there is in the chief executive's forward, and I'll read it out. The first sentence of it, at least. Everything we do as a council and the services we provide or commission from other bodies is of huge importance to all the people across Cambridgeshire. And that, with all due respect, just isn't true. Almost everything we do as a council and many of the services we provide or commission from other bodies is in fact of no importance or very little importance to most of the people across Cambridgeshire. Most people aren't interested in most services which are provided because it's nothing really to do with them. And the failure to understand that in terms of trying to represent what people want, us assuming that everything we do is of the utmost importance and everyone believes in it is just not true. And this, again, comes down to a matter of politics and it's a matter of prioritisation. And with the utmost respect to the chief executive, whom I'm not trying to personally criticise, and he won't take it that way, I know. But that attitude is just unhelpful in trying to ensure that we actually prioritise the things, first of all, which matter to people, and secondly, which they need.
Chris, thank you very much for that comment. I think there's a few people who want to come back. Maybe Stephen might want to come back, but let me say if he doesn't, that's completely up to him. The idea that if you're not currently interested in or using a service, that it doesn't matter to you is a fundamental thing upon which we are going to have to disagree. Adult social care is of no interest to me whatsoever. I am 40 years old and all my elderly relatives live abroad. Dare I say it, it will have a very big impact on my life if that collapses around me. And it is absolutely, it's your prerogative to believe what you believe about what matters to people or what doesn't matter to people. But it is our duty to care about those things, whether everybody else does or not. And in that spirit, I will endorse what the chief executive put in the introduction. And I know that there's something vaguely similar to that Richard wants to say. Was that why you raised your hand, Richard?
2 points, one that and one separately on the report. And I'm not going to comment on how beautiful or otherwise our chief executive is, or indeed any of the rest of us around this table, including my good self. I just think the Conservatives have got it wrong. You know, the idea that most of us aren't going to grow old and become disabled at some stage, as you've just said, or are parents already and have children, you know, that's a hell of a lot of people. You know, everyone relies on transport and moving around. And if our waste disposal stops, that affects absolutely everyone. And I think we need to talk in terms that people can relate to. I think, you know, where I'd agree with Councillor Bowden is if you put it in the jargon of our services, people wouldn't relate to it. But if you talk about all of those everyday experiences, it really is everyone. And I think this is not about the chief executive. It's about all of us needing to be able to relate that to the people with whom we represent. My second point, unrelated to the comments at the other side of the table, there's a lot in this that I'm proud of, but I'll save that for February in the budget setting meeting. But what I really like in this, and it'll come on later when we talk about the change strategy, is our continuing aspirations for change. We're not wanting to stand still. We're not just cowed by the financial difficulties before us. We are utterly determined to drive up standards and to improve services at the same time as managing very difficult situations. And I'm very proud of what we do in the adults and health space around early prevention and early intervention, correction and prevention. But can we do better again? Yes, we can. I think our aspirations on Care Together, bringing care services more local, are brilliant, and the progress we made is good. But can we really reform that more quickly in terms of our commissioning services? Yes, we can. And we've got some brilliant policies around direct payments and helping elderly and disabled adults to manage their own packages where they want to. but people aren't taking it up, and they're not taking it up not through their choice, but because our systems still aren't flexible and responsive enough. So I'm quite happy to read this report, and instead of saying we're perfect, we're the best, everything the opposition says is wrong, I'm saying we're the people that want to change and improve things, and we are determined to do it.
Thank you, Richard. Lorna.
Thank you. I did actually meet a resident once when I was out knocking on doors who told me that he was absolutely livid that he had to pay for education because he didn't have any children. This struck me as remarkably short-sighted, because surely at even the most basic level, he would need to be confident that if he went into a shop and bought something, somebody would know how to add up and subtract and handle change and whether the bill was right. Or if he was wanting a carpet fitted, he would need to know that somebody knew how to measure and how to cut. And all of that is education, and it directly affects his life. It's just that he doesn't realise it. And I'm fairly astonished to realise that somebody who has been a quite senior politician in Cambridgeshire for some years doesn't really understand the difference between it's not important to me and I'm not interested in it. There are lots of things that are...
It's not going to be a point of order, but
A
you can
point of
make it
personal
anyway.
explanation, my apologies. It's not what I believe. I fully understand the requirements, the needs, the importance of the vast majority, but not all, of the policies which we and the services which we provide. What I was talking about is what ordinary people believe. And that's what I said. And if anyone here doesn't agree with that, then I don't think they've knocked on enough doors.
Well, the point is exactly that there is a difference between being important and being interested. There are all sorts of things that are important to me that I have no interest in whatsoever. I know they're important. They may be important later on. They may be important now, and it's just not something I want to spend time on. I just want to make sure, just to be confident that it's there if I need it and not think about it anymore. This idea that things are only important if they're interesting is fundamentally misguided. And if we're saying that there are things that are hugely unimportant, a lot of things indeed, I think Councillor Bowden was suggesting, are hugely unimportant in the minds of people in Cambridge. I'm just wondering which those are. Is it highways? Is it transport? Is it adult care? Is it children? Is it health? Is it waste? Is it green space? Is it decarbonisation? Is it libraries, citizenship, trading standards? All of those things we do have fundamental impacts. And even if we don't want to think that they are things that we want to spend a lot of time thinking about, nonetheless, they are important to us. And I think it's really fundamental that we understand the difference.
Thank you, Lorna. Are there any further points for debate? Steve?
Yes, thank you, Chair. And it was really interesting to see a composite, really competent politician turn that simple statement by Councillor Bowden around into meaning something very, very difficult that could then be shredded, but wasn't where it started at all. But well done for doing that. I just wanted to pick up on what is important, what is relevant, and and that. And just as a sort of personal analogy, when I started knocking on doors, I was quite naive, and I said, "I'm standing for council, and what would you like me to do for you?" And many blank faces. I didn't take the traditional route of please vote for me. I just said, "What would you like me to do for you?" Many people said, and I live in Fenland, of course, which has an excellent reputation as an excellent run council, said, "No, you're all right, mate. Carry on, and you're doing a good job." And that was it. That was all I got. Many houses. Sometimes I wish the kids had a bit more to do in the evenings. And I thought, well, they have a lot more than I ever did when I was a youngster. But that was it. Time after time, door after door. Now, if you go out now and actually ask the same question, door after door, or say, why can't you fix the potholes? Why can't you sort my pavements out? It's terrible these days. I don't need to put up with this. I pay over £2,000 a year for a Plan D property and I get nothing for it. That's what happens when you knock on a door and I say, well, actually, I think you're right because you're paying £2,000 a year, the vast majority of which goes to the county council run by the joint administration. And I disagree with the way that they're spending their money, and pavements and highways being probably the top of that list. So there's a big difference in what is important or interesting people, depending on what their impact on their lives is at the moment. One of the biggest impacts on anybody's lives, one of the biggest reasons for the County Council's budget is adult social care and children's social care. And I'll make no bones about that because it doesn't matter who's in charge of the County Council. When somebody says to me, what do I get for my money? I say, you're probably lucky that you don't really have an in-depth knowledge of that because you don't have somebody that is receiving the kind of care and treatment that the vast majority, over 70% of our budget goes on. And so it's only a small proportion, 9% that goes on our place, and only a small proportion of that goes on highways and transport. But it is up to us, all of us, to listen to our residents when you stand there and get a person who is absolutely furious that they've lost yet another tyre to a pothole, when your satisfaction survey comes up with a 79% dissatisfaction rate, that you reprioritise on what's important to the public, not what you believe is best for them. So yes, there is a difference between what's important and what people find is relevant, and that changes the amount of effect it has on their lives. And I would suggest in the last 3.5 years, and I know Councillor Machini asked for more time, I think 3.5 years of steady decline is enough time really to be shown that you shouldn't be given more time. We need a change of direction. If you won't do it, I hope that come May of next year, the public will ask somebody else to do the job. Thank you.
Thank you. Chris, if I can ask you to try and be either new points or very, very brief.
I'll do both, Chair, if I may. Councillor Dupre asked a question, which I'm more than happy to answer, which things aren't seen to be as important, and then she listed a long list of important services which we provide. But the thing that many people, maybe most, but certainly many people think isn't important is what doesn't affect them directly. Now, that's what they think. We in this room, of course, realise differently. We in this room realise that there are statutory services we've got to provide, and that there are some services we provide to a very small number of people which are absolutely vital and are very expensive. We understand all of that. What I was talking about is what ordinary people actually think. And ordinary people don't actually believe that we in this county council, or government generally, it has to be said, actually provides the services which they think are important and relevant to them. And that was the point that I was making.
Thank you for explaining it. I'll leave it there as it is. I don't know that it deserves much more of a response than it has had already. Steve.
Very quickly, I got distracted by the points that were being raised. But again, this is agenda item number 8, the strategic framework. And the point I was making, it is your strategic framework. And that is how you're choosing how to spend your money. So I can't support it. So I just wanted to let you know that we will be coming forward with our amendment in February as per usual. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. I expected nothing else, and that's an absolutely fair point. I see no more hands. Can I please ask, therefore, that we move on, because we do. It is 12 o'clock, which is quite apt because we need a break after that. We are recommended to approve the newly updated strategic framework, which Councillor Count points out is our strategic framework that we have worked on, and we own it, and delegate any amendments to the strategic framework to the relevant officers and the chairs and vice chairs of this committee. Can I have everyone in favour, please? Yes, trust me. Are you okay, Michelle? Everyone against? I saw no abstentions, just to check, no abstentions. David, is that an against or an abstention? An against. Excellent.
Chair, the result of the vote is 9 votes in favour, 5 against, no abstentions. The motion is carried.
Very much, Michelle. We've got to stop now for a break. Can I ask that we reconvene, and please, we really have still more to do than I would like. Can we be back in exactly 10 minutes? I will start irrespective of who's here. Members, I appreciate we are still being connected to the civilized world and all the rest of it, but I am very, very conscious we need to get on. So with the blessing of the facilities people still trying to sort out our electricity, I think we really ought to start. And thank you so much to them for coming in and helping. We've dealt with item number 8 just before the break. If I could get us to start thinking about item number 9, which is the future council change strategy, which we are now here. Stephen, you are introducing the report.
Thank you, Chair. Back to the biggie enough and ugly enough Chief Executive again, who quite rightly took no offence from Councillor Bowden.
And it's very attractive, but just with...
Moving on, Chair. So the reason I'm introducing this item is because I actually think it's fundamentally important for the development of this organisation as a whole. You have already, as a committee, considered the refresh of the strategic framework earlier, which is obviously very much focused on Cambridgeshire as a place, Cambridgeshire's people and Cambridgeshire's communities. However, one of the things that we need in place to complement our strategic framework as an authority and its outward-facing approach is something that speaks to the organisation itself and talks to the need to reform and evolve many of our services and the way we operate as a county council. Much of that's been an evolution that's been taking place over a number of years, not least the decoupling of our former shared services with Peterborough City Council, which has happened significantly over the last 2 to 3 years and is very much reaping benefits in terms of refocus on the needs of Cambridgeshire's communities. The basis for setting out a change strategy, unlike many other councils, not calling it a transformation programme. I will explain why not calling it a transformation programme in a moment, but actually what we want to talk about is the series of interconnected developments needed for this organisation to better adapt to the requirements of its communities, to better adapt to the needs to reform its services, but perhaps most importantly, to better deliver services in a way that is productive, is effective, and is equally efficient. So that's what this change strategy is about. Underpinning the strategy are 5 proposed programmes of cross-cutting work that would be applicable to the entirety of the council. One that addresses the issues of our assets, and I don't just mean our corporate office accommodation, I mean the totality of assets owned by the council, including buildings, including our fleet, including our land ownership. Secondly, there is a proposed programme that would sit underneath the auspices of this strategy that is in management speak terms referred to as target operating model. I would call that workforce redesign and ensuring that we bring our staff and our services very much closer to communities. The third strand is around commissioning and commercial, reflecting on some of the comments from members earlier today. Actually, the highest proportion of our spend as a county council is through commissioned or contracted services rather than directly provided services. And whilst our directly provided services are really important to us, absolutely ensuring we not only get maximum value for money from our external spend, but that we recycle as much of that as possible into the Cambridgeshire economy is critical. So that's why that strand exists. The fourth strand, again, speaking to some of the points that I think members have already debated earlier today in response to the quality of life survey results, is improving our whole approach to customer engagement and experience. And if you'll forgive the slightly trite phrase, ensuring that we have no wrong door for people to approach the council and that they actually get the help they need irrespective of how they get in touch with us, whether that's in person, over the phone or online. Equally, we want to make it easier for people to deal with the council and be able to do more things digitally where possible, but really importantly, not losing sight of the need for digital inclusion across Cambridgeshire, which leads me on to my final of the 5 programmes that would sit under this strategy if approved by members, which is around data, digital and technology. If members will allow me to just briefly say, I think this council has a huge opportunity to exploit technology to a much greater extent than it historically has. I think our IT infrastructure and IT enterprise architecture in this organisation is ripe for significant reform and modernisation. And whilst we have strategies in place that are meant to govern that, I think driving it through a programme approach, making sure we use data to inform all the decisions we make and really exploit new and emergent technology in the right way, such as artificial intelligence, is exactly what any modern and contemporary council should be now doing. So this strategy really frames itself around the delivery of those 5 programmes rather than particular action plans that you might expect to see in any other strategy. I mentioned the word transformation earlier, Chair. Transformation, in my experience, both personal and professional, has actually become a dirty word in many parts of the public sector. It has been used for some time effectively to disguise cuts to services, in my experience. That's why we talk about change in this document and we don't talk about transformation. I would also say, Chair, in my experience, transformation very rarely actually happens. It usually is some form of change, transformation from one state to another without actually having to evolve from one to the other in between is very rare in public service delivery, and I commend those organisations that have actually achieved transformation. In our case, this is about reform, it's about building on solid foundations, and it's about ensuring we have an innovative council going forward. In terms of reporting on progress with this strategy, one of the elements that we will be bringing forward in future as officers is a report to this committee for scrutiny on a regular basis around the delivery of all of our major change programmes. One thing that I know that some members of this committee and I have discussed before is the need for members to have oversight of all the major change programmes happening across the authority, and that will be brought together under a portfolio dashboard reporting arrangement that will be presented here in the future. That's how you can ensure that members have oversight and the ability to scrutinise progress on the 5 programmes that would underpin this work. Chair, I think that's more than sufficient introduction from me at this stage. I certainly endorse the strategy as it's stated. I think this is something that is a long overdue opportunity for us to speak to the organisation as well as speaking to our residents and communities through the strategic framework. And it will allow me through the corporate leadership team to drive further improvements, efficiencies and effectiveness against those 5 themes. Very happy to take any comments or questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you for that introduction. Very, very useful. I will take questions to you and comments in just a moment. Can I just underline something that you just said? There is some unwelcome jargony feeling to the word transformation, as you've noticed, and we do want to make sure that we're not, just talking about the kind of stuff that we want to cut. But change, in my opinion, which is why I also endorse this strategy very heartily, and we will discuss this in just a moment, is because change is also cultural change, which transformation is not. And I would like to encourage members, which is why I'm saying this now as opposed to at the end. I would like to encourage members to also give appropriate focus to this aspect of the change strategy, because in my opinion, that is so, so, so important, rather than just transformation in our budgets, which is also important. But there are bad things awaiting those that neglect one in favour of the other. Okay, so questions for Stephen. I saw Chris raise his hand. Would you like to make a... No. So is there anybody who's got actual sort of specific questions for Stephen? Edna.
Yes, thank you very much for this, and it's very welcome and very interesting, and I'm very much in support of it. I concur with the comments made, Chair, by yourself as well. I think the idea, I'm really interested in sort of the how. Maybe it's a bit premature to discuss some of the how, but in the design principles, the idea that we have, I mean, what's particularly welcome is that we have an outside-in perspective on this, not just at what we consider internally, but we very much take into account residents' perspectives, the no wrong door to access services or information. And I'm just wondering how we're going to test what the residents' experience is, and then how to tension that against internal pressures in the design principles. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Councillor Murphy for the question. I think it's actually a very helpful question. And whilst most of that would be picked up through the customer experience, customer engagement programme I've mentioned, clearly we already have opportunities to build on what we have now. So the quality of life survey we've already heard about. I actually think what we need to be doing more of is real-time satisfaction surveying of our residents, and that can be done through technology and other forms, which is one of the things we should be doing more of. I would also say, having had a conversation recently with our communications team around the redesign of the County Council's website, we should actually be testing things with groups of citizens and residents from across Cambridgeshire on a more ongoing basis. So again, I would see that being picked up as part of, if you forgive the phrase, a residents panel type approach or a user-based type approach, so that the redesign of services that sit under the change strategy is with, not to, residents. Hope that helps, Chair.
Stephen, thank you very much for that answer. Philippa, did you also want to ask a question?
Yes, and obviously Stephen was primed that I would be raising this issue, but there is a question I would like to follow up on his very helpful introduction, and that is to do with digital exclusion. I know Councillor Hunt and I were discussing this in another committee. I would like to know if it's possible for there to be officers or part of all officers' approach to actually be actively looking for the barriers that digital communication can throw up for some people sometimes. The answers are very complex. It's like any sort of learning disability or economic restriction in terms of whether you can use digital access, you can access services by digital means. And we must always, always, always have an alternative. And we must be aware when the digital approach is a problem for people. Sometimes they just get built in almost without noticing, and I have found officers extremely helpful, and we never thought of that sort of approach, which is great, but I'd like to feel there was somebody actually actively looking for those barriers. As in years gone by, I might have been looking for stairs that stop people going by wheels to places. Let's identify those problems, please, and deal with them. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to Councillor Slatter for the question. Multi-layered response, really, rather than a single point of response. So I think, first of all, if I look at the data, digital and technology element of what would be driven through this change strategy, I've been very clear with officers who are thinking about the scope of that work that we need to talk about digital by design rather than the assumption that things should be digital by default. Digital by design, therefore, means we have to think about how we include everybody. So it's not simply the use of technology. As I've said earlier in the introduction, it's the use of face-to-face contact, it's the use of telephony. And if I were in a different type of business, I'd call that our channel strategy and making sure we have the right routes and options for people to use, irrespective of their skills, their digital literacy, or even English being their first language in some cases. So actually at the heart of this is what we have to do under our equalities duty and the requirement to undertake equality impact assessments when we are making changes to services. It's probably also a nice opportunity for me to mention that we do already do quite a lot of really exceptional work in this area to help improve digital literacy across the county. Our Cambridgeshire Skills team for adult learning and education actually provides a whole range of courses and support for people to improve their digital literacy. And clearly, our library service also provide frontline contact points for individuals to receive support. Part of the emphasis around redesigning the way we work, and very much aligned to, I think Councillor Howitt used the phrase earlier, closer to communities, is making sure we have council officers in venues rather than being centrally sat in remote places. They're out and about in communities, accessible and able to help people. Libraries are the obvious hub to use for those types of advice services, in my experience. And longer term, thinking about use of our assets, it's how we do that in a much more joined up way with our district partners, because clearly many of the advice services and day-to-day touch points our district council colleagues are already providing. So I think, Councillor Slatter, it's a really important point. I guess it's not just relating to digital, but it's just about how do we include rather than exclude in any of these areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen, and thank you, Philippa, for the question. Dare I say that this is the beginning of the conversation rather than the end, so these things will come back and we will be able to monitor how well they're going. If there are no more questions for Stephen, shall I take some more general points of debate? I'll start from Chris and then Stephen, then come back.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair. Interesting comment that was made by the Chief Executive, first of all, about the word transformation and how, I think he used the word dirty, it's become. And undoubtedly that's true. But and I think that the chief executive was also correct to say that transformation has far too often been used to hide decisions about levels of service rather than actual transformation. The chief executive will be pleased to know, if he doesn't already know, that in Finland we very much follow that. We've had 2 iterations of transformation agendas at the same time as 2 iterations of comprehensive spending reviews. The distinction's really important, but I understand why the chief executive doesn't want to be tainted by those who have abused the word all too often, the word transformation. Chair, I've been quite concerned in this administration, in many committee meetings now, where papers have been introduced by under the name of officers rather than members. And it's a case, in my opinion, of members failing to take ownership and responsibility as they should for matters which are brought before committees. This paper, however, is a different one, and I'm really pleased that it was the chief executive who introduced this, because we're not here talking about policy. We're not here even talking about choices to be made to do with policy. What we're talking about is delivery. How can policy, how can objectives be delivered? What are the technical challenges? What are the technical opportunities that there are in order to do so? And from a technical point of view, I congratulate the chief executive on producing this. I think it's a really well-produced paper in order to show what the difficulties are which are facing the delivery of the objectives and what ways those difficulties can be addressed. So I was really impressed by this paper, I have to say. The only reason I can't support it is that it is designed to deliver the objectives of the administration. And that's fine. That is exactly what the chief executive must do. That's his job. But whilst I fully agree with the technical side of all of this that's been put in, and I very much hope that if there is any change of administration, we will inherit this, I can't actually support it because of the strategic ambitions which it specifically mentions as being driven towards. But I do congratulate the chief executive on a very good technical piece of work here.
Thank you, Chris. Stephen, was there anything that you wanted to say?
Just very briefly, in response to Councillor Bowden, I'll obviously not respond to some parts of what he said because that's not for me to do. I was aware, however, of the work that Fenland District Council had been doing in the transformation programme they have had underway, having spoken with and regularly meeting with Fenland's chief executive as well. As I said, Councillor Bowden, in my remarks, whilst in some places transformation may have received unfortunate connotations, I also congratulate those authorities or organisations that have genuinely achieved it. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen, for that comment. I'll go back to Steve now.
Thank you, Chair. It's interesting that it's a change document rather than a transformation one, because of course that was the strap line that the Labour Party used to get into power. Change, change, change. That was what they promised everybody. And boy, by George, did we get it yesterday, a change for the worst, in my opinion. And I think many people, particularly people who understand economics, agree, such as the Office for Budget Responsibility, who said that the disposable income in people's pockets will be down largely because of all the changes introduced yesterday. Those are official documents. Now, I do welcome change. I do welcome change when they are outcome driven and they are handled the right way. And I applaud the chief executive for the way he's gone about trying to deliver on behalf of, dare I say, the almost absent joint administration in this respect. And I do mean almost absent. When we look at how the relationship between officers and members used to be under the previous Conservative administration, we owned what was going on. We worked alongside our officers to deliver the things that we thought were best for the people of Cambridgeshire. We see earlier iterations in this joint administration, such as removing the names of committee chairs and vice chairs as actually proposers, etc., of the documents, and disassociating themselves from it and letting officers take all the strategic responsibility for everything in front of us. We've heard a great introduction by Stephen Moore, the chief exec, today about how he's gone about this particular piece of work almost in isolation from the members, but as Councillor Bowden does say, in delivering their strategic aims. And this is highlighted in 2.4. Our future council has been developed through workshops with the council's corporate leadership team, extended leadership team of service directors and heads of service across all directorates from spring 2024 onwards. It's also been informed by best practice within local government and from outside the sector, and nothing there about the joint administration. Now, I know that a competent officer, chief executive such as Stephen Moore is, no doubt he will say when he comes back on, yes, of course, I had in-depth discussions with the joint administration, and of course, we shall all take his word on that. But it's obvious from the nature of this plan and what's in front of us that there is an element of ownership that isn't there. And it's an element of falls the side of the fence that is clearly the officer's domain, and therefore members, the joint administration members, not the Conservative members, are perfectly happy for this to go ahead in that basis. Now, I don't mind you doing that because I think, as Councillor Bowden said, you've done a very good job of actually declaring how you're going to go about achieving their strategic outcomes. But because it is their strategic outcomes, I will once again vote against this. But I would like to highlight a couple of, just move on to a couple of other points. I've seen this type of stuff before, and I hope it'll be different. So it's outcomes driven. It says things like we've got to stop silo working, and the amount of times I've seen that kind of message as an outcome, it's unbelievable. And it's a great aspiration until it comes up against reality. And we've seen transformation programs now at Dirty Word. We see change programs. We see staff restructuring. All of it is always to achieve that sort of thing. And whilst you can make some inroads, there's also an impossibility about it, because certain things you can make improvements to, but you will never, ever actually get 100% out of it. But I do welcome the fact that it's attempting, once again, to deliver on that. I particularly welcome the ongoing work in the digital sphere, because I think that whilst the budget is going through the roof, it's very human dependent. And there's a lot of self-service that was actioned initially by the Conservatives that is now being continued on. And as technology improves, we can try and do more about that. That is one of the central pillars of this. So I do agree with this. I wasn't quite so keen on the wording about the divorce from Peterborough that was initiated by this joint administration, meaning that we can concentrate on our Cambridgeshire residents more, because whilst I agree with the actual message, yes, we can perhaps concentrate on Cambridgeshire residents more, there was a cost involved. So we also charge our Cambridgeshire residents more. The joint administration put extra millions into the budget for the reform of the senior structural team. So there are things here that I like. There are things that I think we will see over time whether they have the differences measured that make a difference. But overall, I don't agree with members being so divorced from the actual day-to-day workings so that they can't help steer it. We heard a great question from Councillor Philippa Slatter earlier on about how we're going to handle this. And I'd have expected all of that to have been ironed out and driving forward what you wanted from this behind closed doors before the paper was ready to be presented for scrutiny by the entire committee. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Steve. Yeah, go on. Stephen, you go first. I'll make some more comments later.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Councillor Kent for the comments, and absolutely understand his position. Two observations from me, one technical in nature and the other a clarification. So yes, I can clarify that the development of this strategy has been discussed with members of the Joint Administration prior to its appearance at committee, and could readily produce the audit trail and indeed confirm exactly which members have been engaged. But that's point number one. The clarification I did, however, want to come back to is this issue of reports being presented by officers rather than being presented by members, and reports coming forward in the name of officers rather than members. Cambridgeshire County Council operates through a committee system, not a cabinet and scrutiny system. In a cabinet and scrutiny system, executive members have executive decision-making powers. That's why the reports come forward under the name of the respective cabinet member. In a committee system, which is not the first such occasion I've worked in one, reports come from officers because they are technical reports that are then determined by the cross-party committees that they report to. That's why members' names do not appear on the reports for Cambridgeshire County Council. That's the constitutionally correct position now, and it's certainly my view as one of the 3 statutory officers charged with corporate governance that ensures reports are produced by officers for cross-party debate. That view was also reaffirmed by our monitoring officer, independent to my view on that matter. I hope that clarification and explanation is helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Steve.
Yeah, I was just coming back on that point of clarification. I cannot dispute with the current position of the current monitoring officer, the current chief exec, current section 151 officer. However, in the 4 years beforehand, we did have a chief exec, a monitoring officer, and a section 151 officer that did agree that our names were associated with those reports, and they were driven by us. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. I think we'll leave that particular discussion there. Richard.
Yes, I didn't want to respond to anything I've heard. I wanted to make my own contribution. Firstly, I think the principles for changing this are really important, and I want to say I really support them. I think the idea that we are more place-based, which plays to everything we want to do in terms of closer to communities, is really important. The shift to preventative work I've already talked about this morning. As you know, Chair, I strongly support the efforts of Michael Hudson and others towards a much more digitally based council with proper safeguards and safety nets, but I think that we need to be ahead of the curve on that. And as Councillor Count, to his credit, has said, having an outcomes approach, that's what we're all in it for. Absolutely. So there's a lot in this that I think is driving it that I want to strongly support. And I particularly want to strongly support the idea that we can have more honest communications and trusting relationships. I think it's fair to say that the culture of the council that we inherited 3 years ago didn't represent that. These are soft issues, difficult to measure, difficult to define, but definitely the culture was not that. And I don't think we're there yet, which is why I'm particularly pleased to see these, probably above all, as principles for the change. I do think there were 2 things missing. I'm not proposing formal amendments or anything, but I hope in summing up that you might agree to discuss these further, Chair. The first one is in the section on commissioning. I agree we can get much better contract management, totally behind that. But the aspirations of the joint administration for a more mixed economy, to have a more developed relationship with the voluntary and community sector and for insourcing is not there, and I think should be. And I hope that that can be discussed by you with the Chief Executive and others outside of this meeting. And secondly, and it does come back to what Councillor Count was saying, I'm sure there's been proper discussion between officers and the Chair and Vice Chair and others in the administration. I've got absolutely no complaint about that whatsoever. But I think it's completely compatible to have a strong centre that's driving forward, that is seeking a changed agenda, which is what we see and what we want to see, with proper inclusivity and consultation across the authority. And a 500,000 threshold for any decisions to come back to committee, dashboard or no dashboard, I think that's not enough. I think that alongside that, there should be a commitment for executive directors in the respective areas to consult, at least with Chair and Vice Chair of committee, around major proposals in this area. As I say, I don't want to formally propose that, but I hope that that will be recorded in the minutes and used in follow-up between you and the Chief Executive. Neither of those points should detract from what I regard as a really important paper, and one that I full-heartedly support.
Richard, thank you very much for that. Anybody else want to make any more comments? I see no hands for the moment. I am very grateful that this paper is in front of us today. And I was slightly surprised by some of the earlier turns that the discussion took, but that's completely fine. And it's part of why we discuss these papers in public in a transparent manner. We seem to be the Schrödinger administration sometimes. We either have we make these terrible decisions that make everybody's life so difficult, but at the same time, we don't make any decisions, and this is all officers. You're going to have to choose which one that is at some point in order for your critique to be credible. But in terms of this particular paper, first of all, I am absolutely delighted that it's in front of us. There are things that we as an administration need our head of paid service to do in order for the council to be able to operate the way we want, and this is exactly what this does. As you can see, it will have iterations, it will have amendments, it will be subject to further discussion, and it will need everybody's hands on it. And then again, we can either do it through me and Lucy and Stephen, but we can also do it through the chair and vice chairs of committee, because this change strategy needs to go everywhere, which is why the comments about culture change are so important. If we don't have the right culture, we don't get the right outcomes. And we all know that, and the effort to unearth some of the reasons behind that, which have not been faced fully beforehand, I believe will lead to a much better outcome in the future. And this document will be inherited by the next administration, which will be a new administration, whichever colours it has. It will be a new administration. You always have a new administration every so many years. But if things like these don't underpin us, we as politicians can't do our job. So I think it's very, very important that we get these things done. We are being asked to approve this, and there will be a mechanism for ongoing amendments to be made, as you can see from recommendations number B, letter B. I get the feeling I should take an actual vote on this. So can I ask for everyone in favour of the recommendations, please? Yes, that all good. Everybody against? And any abstentions at all? I see none.
Chair, the result of that is 10 votes in favour, 4 votes against and no abstentions. The motion is therefore carried.
Michelle, thank you so much for that. We are now moving on to item number 10 of 14. We're getting there. Please, let's start being quite efficient. Engagement and consultation strategy refresh. And I am so sorry. Somebody's going to have to put names on my notes at some point, or I get very confused. The Policy and Insight Manager, Hannah, thank you very, very much for coming. We'll introduce the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This paper sets out the approach taken to refresh the engagement and consultation strategy titled Closer to Communities Working Together. Effective engagement and consultation with residents and stakeholders allows their voices to be heard and for their views to be considered in decision-making processes. As was set out in the Business Planning and Quality of Life papers earlier today, understanding our residents' perspective is key to our commitment to being closer to communities, something that is reaffirmed in the refreshed strategic framework. The key objectives of this refresh of the engagement and consultation strategy were to improve clarity, clearly define the legal obligations, and reflect our organisational changes and updated practices. The strategy will support officers to plan, conduct and report on engagement and consultation activity in a consistent, transparent and legally compliant way, using appropriate tools and based on best practice guidance. To support delivery, a number of next steps are outlined, including the monitoring of consultation activity, greater coordination and oversight, as well as the establishment of an advisory panel. The consultation guidance for officers has also been refreshed. A further review of the strategy will be undertaken in 2025 with a focus on engagement activity. Thank you.
Hannah, thank you very much for this report and for presenting it. Are there any questions for Hannah? Graham.
I have a couple of questions which I mentioned to Sue, which I think have been passed over to Hannah. One is the how one can pick out examples in this refreshed document, which I think is excellent overall, to indicate the scale of consultation that is expected. So, for example, the A141 and St Ives improvements has got a big display downstairs, and a card has gone to every local resident. And I think that is absolutely the inexpensive scheme and lots of options to consider. At the other end is a much more parochial extension to some double yellow lines, where I can imagine that only local consultation is needed. And then in the middle is, what do you do about consulting on a 20-mile-an-hour scheme for a village or a town where there's a lot of people who have a view, and some of those people will be vehemently against any proposal. So the two questions there, one is the scale of consultation and how do I pick out from here what that is implied, and the second is how many people have to object to a proposal before members and officers say, no, we're not going to go forward with it, we're going to go with something else. And then the final question which I've got, which is on page 207, it says it's important to highlight that in some instances it may not be appropriate for councillors to be directly involved in certain aspects of the consultation process, particularly where their involvement could compromise impartiality or other key responsibilities. And I think it would be helpful to have some examples of what that might mean. So in my instance, for example, we're consulting the Town Council of Godminster and Huntingdon about whether or not there should be some significant changes to the bridge in between the two towns. And I've been very clear that I want to listen to the views before I make up my mind. But is that what is meant by this, or should I not have anything to do with it whatsoever and just leave it to officers and others? So lots of comments, questions there, which I'm happy to be answered or considered later. Thank you.
Technology was a word. Thank you, Graham. Are there any answers for Graham now? Thank you, Hannah.
So on the number of the sample size for the decisions to be made, the purpose of the survey will always determine if a statistically representative sample is required. We haven't put that within the strategy, but it would be something that the advisory panel would advise officers on at the time of the planning of the survey.
And the other questions about, so what do you do if lots of people say no? How many people have to say no before the committee says, I hear what they say, but we're going to say yes? And then the final question was about the involvement of councillors and where it could cause impartiality or other key responsibilities, whatever they might mean.
So in terms of the decision-making process, engagement and consultation is used to inform decision-making. However, the outcome of that consultation will not determine what the decision is. It will be used to inform members' decision-making. And on the second point, we can provide examples to councillors in the future where involvement should or should not take place, but that would be on a case-by-case basis.
Thank you, Hannah, for those answers. Peter.
Just an observation which follows up from Graham's point to some extent, which is about councillor involvement and councillor engagement. I mean, by its nature, our role involves, talking to a very wide group of people, whether it be individual residents, parish councils, etc. So it was just a plea or an observation that don't underestimate the ability of members to, crystallise feedback and get quality input from residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter, for that. Are there any more questions for Hannah or points for general debate? We can move to the points of general debate now. Chris.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair. My initial comments will be general about the public sector, not specific to Cambridgeshire County Council. And my main comment is that consultation is all too often just a sham. It isn't used to inform decision-making. The people consulting are doing it either because they've got a legal obligation to anyway, and they've already made up their mind, or quite often because they've got a small p or big P political point to make, and they do so through the consultation. And this isn't just in local authorities, it goes wider than that, including particularly, I have to say, in the health service. So I am very dubious about the value of much consultation because it has been so devalued by its abuse. And that devaluation isn't merely in my mind, it's in the mind of the people who are being consulted with. When we see the response rates which there are, they are pathetic response rates almost always. There are occasional examples, and I think Councillor Wilson may mention something which might be one of the exceptions. There are occasional examples when consultation does produce a good response, but generally the response rates for consultations are pathetically low. And the reason is people don't believe that what they say will be taken into account. And that's based on their past experience that they've had of engaging in consultations and finding that nothing changes at all as a result of what it is that they say. And I could stop being political and start mentioning some specific examples, but I'm not going to because I'm trying to make a general point here. So I'm not particularly happy with the whole of this paper. I do accept, of course, that we do need to update our process so that we fulfill our legal obligations. That goes without saying. We absolutely have to do that. But until and unless we reach a state in society where public consultations truly have an input into decision-making, which we are not at the moment, and anyone who claims that we are is either deluded or is misinforming people. Until we get to that stage, my personal preference would be to comply with the legal minimum that we need to, because we must comply with the law, accepting that there may be some exceptions in cases which, for example, Councillor Wilson was just mentioning, where there may be a matter of public interest which will engage the public, and maybe we may even listen to what the public has got to say. I was interested in reading the paper and going to the actual policy itself and reading through. And there are very few things, of course, you can disagree with. You can't disagree with the gunning principles. They're there for a very good reason. Whether they're really followed or not all of the time may be, of course, a matter for some dispute. But I was a bit surprised to see comment made about what was in one place called the law of legitimate expectation, and in another place in the report itself called the doctrine of legitimate expectation. And whilst I'm sure you'll be aware of this, I'm sure, Chair. But when we look at the case law on this, and particularly the leading case, surprisingly, the leading case in English law is United Policyholders Group and the Attorney General of Trinidad and Tobago. But that's the leading case in English law on this subject. It's a very comprehensive case, a very good case to read. And when you read that, obviously I can't disagree, and I won't disagree, with any substantive legitimate expectations there may be. But the bar for procedural legitimate expectations is exceptionally high in terms of a judicial review. And merely having people, I'll quote the actual words, bitter disappointment is not enough in order to justify a judicial review on a procedural legitimate expectation. So I'm a little bit concerned that there may be some encouragement to undertake comprehensive deliberations and consultations on matters where there is no reasonable prospect that there is any of there being any procedural legitimate expectation which could actually lead to a judicial review. I'm not going to be supporting this paper, but obviously I do welcome the fact that we're making sure that we comply with the law. We always must comply with the law.
Thank you, Chris, for that. I think, Steve.
Thank you, Chair. I've got some overall comments to make, and then I'm going to talk about this paper a bit. So I do agree with Councillor Bowden when he says that a lot of consultations that take place are a sham. We had a great example in this area. The Making Connections from the GCP was supposed to be a consultation. Anybody who took time to read it knew it was a marketing tool, a sales document. A preconceived outcome, the Labour and Liberal Democrats' desire to introduce a congestion charge, was framed in such a way that it made it really difficult to go against it if you just engaged in the consultation. But I say it's a sham because apart from the way that I interpreted how I looked at it, the public did actually take the trouble to really, really object to it. And yet, despite 26,000, I think, responses, the vast majority against bringing a congestion charge. It continued to go through the machinations of becoming introduced. So there was a consultation, there was a clear steer from members of the public what shouldn't happen, and it continued to go through its machinations. Now, on that journey, all of a sudden, the voice of the people was heard through the democratic process, the threat of losing seats. And then the GCP, the Labour and Liberal Democrat led GCP, dropped the congestion charge, not because they'd listened to 26,000 people, but because of fear of losing seats. And that's why I say it's a bit of a sham. We have another example, the one we heard of today. This council is going to go out on a consultation to ask people if they want to pay 4.99% council tax, because that is where this administration wants to end up. They will not contemplate, as we heard from the amendment earlier on, you will not contemplate anything less than that. 0% was put forward, but there's only one figure being consulted on, the maximum. So yes, a lot of it is a sham. It's to achieve a desired outcome. But one of the other problems with the consultation, we heard a little bit about that, is consultation fatigue. And we are getting a lot of that more in the south of the county than in the north, because of course we know not much money gets spent in the north. It's all spent in the south by the GCP. And even the Labour Mayor, Combined Authority Mayor, drives all his funding that way. So we don't suffer from it as much in the north, but we do see from it in the south. And that isn't covered in the actual strategy document. How much is too much? Is there an element of how much is too much? It's covered in ethereal. We need to do the right amount. But actually, you have to sometimes consider it's not whether it's right the project, it's whether you'll get any meaningful engagement because there's so much going on. I want to turn now to the actual one in front of us, the strategy in front of us. All right. And for me, it's necessary, so I'll vote for it. It's necessary because there's been strategic changes, organisational changes. We've got to keep up with legislation. So therefore, it's necessary, so I'll vote for it. But actually, it's not the strategy I would have wanted in front of me. It's far too abstract. It is very, very high level. We heard some meaningful questions coming in from Councillor Wilson. What happens in this scenario? What happens in that scenario? And the answer, quite in this case with this strategy, is everything will be answered on a case-by-case basis. Everything will be answered on a case-by-case basis. So that strategy is not actually underpinned by something that gives meaning to all of the words. I'll try and explain what I mean by this. An extract from the strategy. The strategy explains how the council will ensure that the public know how to get involved. You know, and yet later on you will find some reference, you know, they can get involved by email or by phone, but it won't be as specific, this will happen in this way. Or there's reference to consultation for a petition. Under how the council will listen to you, we believe that people who live in Cambridgeshire should be able to give feedback on the council services they use. Very, very high level, very strategic, but not actually making any difference. So for me, when I look at what was needed, the gunning principles were needed. I could have sat here, written this strategy and said, here's the gunning principles, let's make sure we adhere to them. And then whenever a question came in from Councillor Wilson, such as what do we do here, it would deliver exactly the same answers we've got today. We'll look at it on a case-by-case basis and it would save 20, 30 pages. So for me, it's just too strategic, too high level, too abstract. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Something in there which I agree with and which is helpful, something which I really don't, but we'll come back to that. Any more debate? We'll go down. Lorna first.
Thank you, Chair. I thought I had indicated. I won't take part in the Conservative Group leadership contest going over there. That's a matter for them. But I did want to say something different, which was about the missing element for me in this strategy is being clear who does this on behalf of the County Council. This putting together consultations is a professional job for people who are expert in that field. I've seen over the years too many consultations, too many surveys, clearly written by people who are experts in their field, but in their subject field, not in putting together a consultation that is actually fit for purpose. I have I remind myself of one that I saw, which was sent to me saying, please forward this to your residents. And I looked at it and I was like, I will pretend this has never happened and we will never speak of this again. It was just so crashingly bad at every level. It was alienating. It had, well, I only went through the first 3 screenfuls before I decided it was absolutely not fit for me nor for anyone else that I knew. And I knew the reaction that I would get from my residents if I put that out there, and I could do without that grief in my life because it was quite unnecessary. But within the first 3 screenfuls, I had found a spelling error of one of the major settlements in Cambridgeshire. I had found a first page which was completely off-putting for all sorts of reasons I won't go into here, and the third page then just jumped in with a whole load of demographic data before you even got to the subject of what the consultation was about. And I'm sure it was put together in a well-meaning way, and it had all the elements that are in the consultation of making sure you've got the questions you need to have and, you know, all the rest of it. But it was clearly put together by someone who had no idea how to put together a consultation. And it was also clear to me that it hadn't been tested in real life by anybody other than the people putting together the consultation. And that's another really important step. I can put together a consultation, and I have in my time, but how do I know that the people who are reading this for the first time will understand what I'm asking in the same way that I do? Have I unintentionally misphrased a question such that the answer I get back from people will be totally not what I'd expected because I didn't think they were going to read it that way? And all of those basic things about this is a job for professionals and we need people with expertise to be ultimately responsible for this is absent from this. And I do think that we should be giving pause in this refresh while we think about who undertakes these specific tasks on our behalf and how do we get that much more right than I have seen in past years. Thank you.
Thank you, Lorna, for that. Richard.
I'll be brief because I know you've got time issues. 2 points. Number one, we've just had a whole discussion about needing to be more honest in our communications. And what there isn't in this report is self-criticism where we can do better. And the idea that we are clear and honest is absolutely right. The idea that we're actually doing that at the moment is not. And I think it's important for us to note that we can do better at that. And we've just agreed that in the change strategy. So we shouldn't pretend that's not the case when we discuss the consultation engagement strategy. I also recall, and I hope that things have improved since I last remember checking, but we don't respond to freedom of information requests in a timely way. We can do better at that. And that, again, is not reflected in this report. And I think we've got to be prepared. If we're going to be honest, let's be honest where we're in a shortfall. And I think those are 2 examples where we can be more honest. I agree with what Councillor Dupre has just said. And I'd add this. I'm not reopening a debate that's been finished and dealt with in due process. I'm dealing with the principle. But you're aware in our estate strategy, there was a case recently where the legal requirements for us to deal with bidders crowded out any opportunity for us to consult with local residents. And it was wrong, in my view. And when the Assets and Procurement Committee terms of reference were drawn up, there was a webinar and I was in it, and I said, we've got to make sure that local consultation is part of the process, not an outcome of the process. And that, I think, wasn't taken up at the time. I would ask that to be reconsidered. I think it is possible for us to abide by our legal obligations, not to prejudice any commercial bidding relationship, with also talking to local residents who are affected by a particular sell-off over what they think. And so I urge that again to be in the minutes of today's meeting and to be considered afterwards.
Thank you, Richard. I just have to very, very quickly note, you know how much I value the points that you've made, but neither freedom of information nor commercial bidding processes are covered by this strategy in any way, shape or form. So we need to be careful that we make those comments in the appropriate forums, although we will take those comments have been made.
Point of order, Chair.
Yeah.
The legally required consultations are in this paper. So I beg to differ from your interpretation.
I know, but I feel obliged to make the same comment I would make to you, whichever side of this table that you sit on. And as I said, I take your comment completely. A consultation is not a bidding process, and a bidding process is not a consultation. Similarly, a consultation is not a referendum. So we have to be very, very careful about not misrepresenting the strategy that is in front of us. But those points have been made and have been noted, and we will absolutely make sure that we've got those on board as we consider the legal obligations that we've got. Who wanted to speak again? Philippa.
Sorry, I've a nasty feeling I don't really belong in this committee because I don't think very strategically, though I enjoy reading the stuff. I feel taken to task in number 9 of the document in terms of, well, as a local councillor, I do surveys, and sometimes they are helped tremendously by our council officers who will set it up, provide the platform, and then give the information back to the appropriate place. For example, where are the parents parking outside a school? That goes out to the parents, comes back via the county council, looks after the data. Great. And they are amazingly helpful, and those are experts in road safety, and they help us make surveys. And we can do that. We shouldn't just be sitting passively waiting for excellent large-scale ones. And if we do it locally, we can do it on paper as well. So I think we should play our part too in finding out the more granular stuff. But that's probably not a question, is it? But I wonder how many councillors actually do use the services of officers and the Microsoft Forms system that we can plug into. Thank you.
Thank you, Philippa, for that. Let's go around again. Mark.
Thank you, Chair. My point is a generic one, and on the whole, I think this is a decent attempt at an engagement and consultation strategy. But my point is there are absolute reasons why we never get the amount of responses. Even on Councillor Slatter's very poignant, where do you park when you take your children to school? I think that's an excellent idea of a miniature survey. But I still think you're probably disappointed by the amount of people that bothered to respond. The point
I'll let you know when it's happened.
Oh, thank you. Well, the point I'm trying to make here is people don't care. They don't sit here pontificating on what's being said this afternoon. How many viewers have we got online today? People don't care. It's up to us to make it important. It's up to us to make it count. So what I'd like to see in the engagement and consultation strategy is the level of light touch in which we're going to do it. How often are we going to bother these people about this subject, that subject, the other subject? Actually, in general, let them get a government in local council, right the way through to the top level, in my opinion, should be there in a light touch way to allow people to live their lives, get on with it, not dictate to them at every minute of what's being done and how they do it, how they comb their hair, what are they allowed to put in it. And I think the engagement and consultation strategy is a decent document, but I think the level at which it's going to be used is important. And I urge, similar to Councillor Howard said a couple of times today, and I think it's a good tool from a councillor, which is get it into the minutes and then it can be debated. Okay, I would urge us to the degree of touch, the lightness of touch that's used in these cases, because we don't half bombard people with a lot of questions that they don't bother answering. So we need to be careful. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark, for that. And I have to say, one of the things I heard from this side of the room earlier that I agree with is that we do have to be mindful of consultation fatigue. It is a very important problem, and we always have to bear that in mind, because sometimes the legal requirements that you've got and the moral requirements that you feel you've got, because everything you want to do, you want to make sure you've asked everybody 17 times, and then by the time it comes in front of you for final decision, people will complain that you didn't talk to them. I mean, it's the usual sort of thing. We all know how that's going to play out, and we still have to do that in some way or other. Part of this is to make sure we've got a reference so that we know how we're going to do it every time, although every time will be different. And the other part of it is that sometimes you do actually think maybe this decision can wait another year because there's been enough this year already. And all of that, all of those considerations will be made, but you need something to underpin them, which is why we've got a strategy. This isn't about any single exercise. We don't see those results come back to this committee, but we have to make sure that this underpins everything that other committees are going to do, which is the basis upon which this is presented to us in front of us today. Now, are there any further points for discussion? Because I really am keen to get on. Again, I feel like I should take an actual vote on this. The recommendations are that we approve the strategy and delegate the amendments, much as is being done with other strategies in front of us today. Everybody in favour, please. All good, Michelle? Yes. Everybody against, please. Any abstentions? Very good.
Chair, the result of the vote is 11 votes in favour, 1 against and 1 abstention. The motion is therefore carried.
Thank you, Michelle, very much for that. And thank you, members. Let's power through. We can do this. Item number 11. Please help me with this because it's getting really late and I'm very hungry. Item number 11, performance management framework. These things are actually, the order on which they are on the agenda is not reflective of the importance of anything, which is why, we do have to be mindful of our own performance here, she says. Number 11, performance management framework report. Richard, have we got you here? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everybody. So this report sets out our refreshed performance management framework. This refresh has taken the foundations of the previous iteration of the performance management framework, which focused predominantly on how KPIs are made and why we use them. The refresh framework looks to build on these foundations, including a clearer performance process that links from individual services and directorates performance all the way through to strategic decision-making, supporting the council to embed performance at the heart of everything we do. This refreshed framework has been carefully considered with best practice incorporated from sources such as Local Government Association and the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny. The appendix that you have attached to the report includes the guidance that will be issued to colleagues across the council on developing, managing and reporting on performance. The diagram at section 3.2 of this report summarises the approach. Directorates will have available in their performance scorecards core information, including workforce and finance, alongside their strategic and operational performance indicators. It's then the strategic indicators that will be reported on to the relevant committee. For this committee, you will see here in the future the combined directorate data for workforce and finance and all the council's directorate strategic key performance indicators to enable this committee to have an overview of the whole council as befits the terms of reference for this committee. So what you'll see is workforce, finance and performance activity all in one place. The strategic key performance indicators presented to committees will be closely linked to the council's strategic ambitions that are set out in the strategic framework. And as such, we're proposing through this refresh to have an annual performance report, which we will publish. The refreshed framework also highlights the importance of a joined-up approach to looking at the full picture of performance. Rather than just looking purely at performance indicators in isolation, considering elements such as workforce, finance, risk and change together should lead to strengthened evidence-based decision-making. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Richard, thank you so much for coming. Sorry, Sue, did you say anything?
Thank you, Chair. And just to say, members will be familiar with this framework because it did come to the previous committee, Strategy, Resources and Performance Committee. And just to assure members, the comments that were made at that time those changes have been made in the document in front of you today. So thank you.
Thank you very much. So I'm also My notes actually say that there was a recirculation of parts of this item because there was a formatting issue with the original documents. I'm hoping this didn't confuse anyone. If anything, if there is a problem with that, please let me know. Are there any questions for Richard or Sue? Are there any comments for debate? Yes, Chris, I had no doubt.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair. I do want to make up for not being here for the first hour of the meeting, so I do need to make up 1 or 2 extra contributions. I am grateful for all of this. I love statistics. I love information. I love numbers. Looking at this, however, I do have to say I'm not convinced. If we have to have 13, and I don't think 13 is the best number to have, but if we have to have 13 KPIs which are reported to this committee, I'm not sure that these are the 13 which I would choose. It's for the joint administration to decide, but surely I would suggest you look for the things which are most important rather than necessarily some relatively minor KPIs which are coming to us here. But that's for you as a joint administration to decide, and it will, as you say, Chair, be for the next administration to decide. We've got 2 KPIs which are reported here, which are in red. So obviously it's interesting to look at them. And I am a bit disappointed about the failure to make sufficient responses to freedom of information requests in time. I see what is written there. However,
Chris, I'm really sorry. Are you sure you're looking at the right thing?
probably not. What?
We are on item 11, not 12.
Oh, I do apologize. So I'm just so eager to make my point on that.
I did start thinking that was right, but then I kind of got very, very confused as you were carrying on. Shall we start again? Are you on board with item 11? Is there anything on item 11 that you want to talk about? Excellent. Does anybody else want to talk about item 11? So this is the Performance Management Framework report, which is not the same as the KPIs and the RAG stuff. Yes, Stephen.
Just a very brief comment, Chair, and apologies to Councillor Bowden, given he's mentioned what he's probably going to talk about on the next item. I thought just to emphasise one of the points Richard made in his presentation, the current KPIs this committee receives, which are in the next report, will not be the KPIs it receives going forward if you approve the revised performance management framework. So I thought that might be just a helpful clarification. Thank you.
That's very, very helpful indeed. Okay, now, are we all happy with item 11? In which case, I might take the opportunity to go to the vote now before somebody changes their mind. Approve and delegate work on amendments, if any. Everyone in favour, please. Is everyone happy? Shall I take it as unanimous? Thank you. Please speak now. If not, too late. Item number 12, sorry, Richard, for the slight confusion, and thank you so much for the report. Much appreciated. Item number 12, which is the corporate performance report, where you actually do get to argue about which KPIs we use and what color they are. But Sue, would you like to talk to us about that first?
Yes, thank you. And yes, item 12, we are looking at Q1 performance against the current set of indicators, so April to June. And obviously, as you expect, it identifies some areas of good performance. It indicates where the changes are, and also the red indicators. I'm going to stop at that point and just allow for questions. Thank you.
And I'm so sorry for asking you to repeat this, but I do feel we ought to clarify this, but given the slight thing that we got ourselves into previously. How will this item look next time? Am I correct in thinking that this will look significantly different next time it comes back?
Yes, that's correct. And that the directorates are looking at their the way they present their scorecard and the way that comes through to policy and service committees. So in future, you will see performance alongside risk, alongside finance, so that you can actually see all of that information together and in a scorecard. And as Stephen has indicated, whether we have got the right selection of indicators, strategic indicators for each committee, that's also been considered and discussed. So what you will see in the next policy and service committees reflects the performance management framework you've just accepted, and obviously then the discussion in those committees about the indicators before those committees if officers feel that they need to be changed. So that this debate will continue, but in the context of the new performance management framework. Thank you. Hope that's clear. Sorry.
Thank you, Sue. And before I take everybody else's question, just in the interest of making sure that people's heads are in the right place, am I therefore correct in saying that as we scrutinize what's in front of us in this particular paper, that we should be sort of backward facing, concentrated, and just concentrate more on what's been happening up until this point, and accept that we might want to reserve judgment on how effective the new stuff is going to be when we see it. So do be mindful of this as you carry on, because I don't want anybody to make a massive deal out of things that are never going to come back in the same way again. With those clarifications having been made, are there questions for Sue? Yes, Chris.
Thank you, Chair. I won't repeat everything I said before, and I won't make I won't speak to this agenda item, but I shall ask the two questions which I was going to ask anyway. The first question is, I am concerned about this freedom of information request failure. And I'd be interested to know, and I'm not expecting an answer here, but I would appreciate something to be circulated to us. Is this a problem which our statistical neighbours are having as well? Or is this something which is specific to Cambridge? I think it's important for us to know that, and I'm not going to make any further point about it until I know if all of our statistical neighbours are facing the same problem, we'll know it's not down to us. My second question is, as I said before, I really love the statistics, I love the numbers, and KPIs of this sort measure, they just list numbers, and that is both a strength and a weakness. It's a strength because it's really clear, it should be unambiguous, and it shouldn't be subject to too much dispute, but it's also got a weakness because it doesn't measure anything to do with quality at all. And on this particular issue, let me just give you an example, if I may, because I would I'd like Sue's comment about how a member is meant to deal with this. One of my residents in my division was concerned about the amount of time and money spent on repairing part of the B1040 just south of the Dugnagh, not the current repairs which are being done at the moment, but the ones which were being done in 2022-23, which also resulted in many weeks of closure and of single way traffic light operation. So he writes to he puts in an FOI request to Cambridgeshire County Council to get the response back. This has nothing to do with us, it's actually Peterborough. So, fair enough, he contacts Peterborough with an FOI, and he gets the answer back from Peterborough. No, sorry, this has nothing to do with us. Those repairs were in Cambridgeshire. Now, Peterborough was correct, Cambridgeshire was wrong. The repairs took place in Cambridgeshire, and they were paid for by Cambridgeshire. But the response that was received was, I'll just say it was wrong. I'm not going to use any other adjective. When there are failings like this, how are we as members meant to report this in to CCC? And do we have feedback which will actually allow an improvement in the performance of FOI requests? Because this really was it was farcical the way in which it was given to me by the resident concerned.
Chris, thank you so much for that. And before we get Sue to give you a full answer on what you've asked, I mean, I think this is important, and it goes back to the point that my colleague made earlier about whether, whether we should have a qualitative eye on whether we're performing in terms of FOI specifically. And yes, we should do. And I think I do hope that there are very clear channels for people to report things that are being shown to us that go like that, because the letter, what you're saying sounds to me like we've got some apologies to make, but in those things will happen, and we have to just make sure that we take full responsibility and make sure it doesn't happen again. And within my memory of the last couple of years, we have had some instances of FOI, managing FOI requests, especially when they come in bulk, that might have led to some learning, and I hope it did. Sue, did you have any actual answers to that other than my commentary?
Thank you. I'll do my best without taking us back to the item previously, but we do recognise in the performance management framework that as well as quantitative measures, we need qualitative measures. And I think that's an area that we do need to look at more across the council and across a number of areas. So I think that's really important. I think also an assurance, taking us back to the change strategy and the solid foundations, I think effective quality assurance measures within services to ensure that services services are performing effectively are also really important, which is why things such as that and quality assurance are part of the solid foundations that we've identified in the change strategy. And then if we get things wrong, and we do get things wrong, then we do have a corporate complaints process as well that I have the pleasure of seeing quite a number of those complaints that come through. And actually it is really important when we get things wrong that we are honest and that we do apologise, and that we do that at the earliest point possible. And so I'm currently involved with colleagues as well, looking at how we strengthen and improve our corporate performance, our performance around complaints, but also in the light of some of the recent ombudsman changes that the Ombudsman Service wants to see around the way we deal with complaints. So I think for me, absolutely, I accept a number of the points Councillor Bowden has made, and also the intersection of some of the things that we need to do to strengthen and improve across a number of bases in order to address I know that was an illustration, but obviously as an illustration, those things do occur, and we do need to ensure that we're improving. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue, for that. Mark?
Just a very quick one, and it's probably addressed to Sue if she'd be kind enough, and I'm happy to come back to me outside if you need. But just looking at the two reds, I know when we get a blue rating, it's because the performance is over a certain percentage over and above what we say. Should we have a maroon rating for something that's further red than it should be? It's an open question. I'm looking at these two, and if you look at indicator 182 on the freedom of information, you read that quickly. Change in performance is improvement, because last quarter it was at its absolute worst, and it's come up a couple of points this quarter. Do you see what I mean? It's like, I'm just wondering whether we need an indicator here that something is way out of kilter, not just red. I'll leave that with you to think about.
Mark, thank you. But dare I say we had that discussion before. I remember it. I don't think I was in the chair, but I remember it. Stephen, did you want to have any comments? I think you did before, and I forgot to call you.
That's absolutely fine. Thank you, Chair. Well, actually, it was on the freedom of information point, which a number of members have picked up on. I have to say the tail off in performance over the last quarter is disappointing. So like Councillor Bowden, I'm actually interested to see the benchmark performance and how that compares to other authorities. I am mindful, however, in the appendix, we do talk about the fact that over the last quarter, some 445 FOI responses have had to be processed. So it's not simply the quality. I agree that the qualitative point is important. There's something around how does the volume compare, not just the performance. So it would be interesting to see how that tracks. And then finally, just as an observation, one of those things I do check. I randomly dip sample FOI responses before they're issued by the council, because I see the incoming FOIs every week, as do all the senior leadership team, and I happen to just choose a couple that I want every week that I say I'd like to dip sample the proposed response in advance of the deadline before it goes out. And I think the quality is variable and could be improved. So that's something that we are taking seriously, and certainly the Director of Legal and Governance, as the officer accountable for our overall approach to freedom of information, is working very closely on that through the shared service we have with Peterborough City Council for this function at present. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. And in fact, let's make sure that this information is circulated, because I think we've all got interest in seeing this benchmark. I have a hunch based on what people have been telling me, but I don't want to put that in public because I might be wrong. Are there any points for debate on this item? Anything that anybody would like to raise in addition to what we've just heard? I have seen nothing, therefore we are asked to note this, which means we don't really need to vote on it, I don't think. I'm hoping this is noted. Now, we've done item 12, great. And item number 13, the corporate risk register. Who have we got to propose that? Mairead, thank you so much. I think we've seen you on Zoom a couple of times. It's great to have you in the room. Whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Chair. So this is our regular corporate risk reports, bringing you updates on the Council's corporate risk register and the risk management processes. The full corporate risk register can be found at Appendix 1 to this report, and an overview of the residual risk scores is provided in Table 1. As requested at the last meeting of this committee, Table 1 now shows the 2 previous residual risk scores on the corporate risk register for a comparison. The key change from our last report is that the score for risk 3, which is the risk that the council does not have enough budget to deliver agreed short and medium-term corporate objectives, has increased from a score of 12 in June to a score of 16 in October, which is above the council's risk appetite. The details for this change in risk score are provided at sections 2.2.2 to 4. The key reason for the change in the score is due to the expected ending of the statutory override in the accounting treatment of deficits within the dedicated schools grant high needs block funding. I would also note that risk 5, which was previously titled failure of corporate governance, has been retitled to serious failure of corporate governance. And that's intended to reflect that the focus is on governance issues which have the potential for a serious impact on the organisation. The remainder of the report provides some further information on risk management activity, including the implementation of the corporate risk strategy. Unfortunately, while section 3.2 notes that we had successfully appointed to the post of corporate risk manager, sadly that candidate has withdrawn, so we are back to advert for the corporate risk manager post. I won't keep you any longer, but happy to take any questions.
All right, thank you very much for this. Member will be very well aware, and oh, I should have put some money on this. Members will be very well aware that this is a standing item. It comes to us all the time, and it always generates very interesting debate. So thank you very much, Mairead, for that. Are there any questions for Mairead? Chris?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I very much appreciate what the work that Mairead is doing and the improvement upon improvement that there is. And the responsiveness that there is to the comments which come from this committee, so and from audit and accounts as well. So I'm very grateful for all of that. And that is what allows us to have the useful discussion, because we're getting more useful information. And I won't talk about all the issues I have with the way in which all of this is done. I've still got plenty of suggestions to make about changes. But what I would like to ask a question on is risk 3, which has been mentioned. And that's because it really is it's a very important risk. It is the risk that the council does not have enough budget to deliver agreed short and medium-term corporate objectives. And that has moved into the red, that is, into an area which supposedly is beyond our risk appetite. Now, I'm not going to argue about risk appetite and all the other things to do with this. I'm going to just concentrate on this one particular risk. And we are given, it's extremely helpful, we're given some 19 different controls that we have on this, and we're also given some 11 different actions to be taken. And I thought all of that was extremely helpful. But I'm just puzzled about what was missing there. If the problem is that the council doesn't have enough budget to deliver agreed short and medium-term corporate objectives, why isn't one of the controls and one of the objectives, one of the remedial actions, to look at potentially changing our agreed short and medium-term corporate objectives?
Who's this question for best to answer before? Would you like to do that? Oh, I'm so sorry. What's going on?
Michael's the risk one.
Oh, in which case, Michael, maybe you can help us begin with this.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. Just to clarify, in terms of the movements of the risk, this is largely related to the current treatment of the DSG deficit in relation to the statutory override, which presently is ending on the 31st of March 2026. And therefore you'll see one of the actions there is around lobbying for clarification on that, something I was actually taking part in national discussions yesterday on, and will continue to do so, and we expect some news on that December and this year and March of next year. As such, I think the actions that are being taken there, and then in addressing, as we move forward in terms of the medium-term financial plan and the budget process, members will recall there is a separate Section 25 financial assessment report that I will present to Strategy and Resources and Performance at the end of January that will pick up the position around the financial risk reserves. So I feel that the controls are adequate within the current framework, the current objectives. But clearly there is a significant issue that sits there outside of our control, and that is something that we need to pay attention to and pay focus to, and something that we are doing. So at this stage, I don't see that the issue that was just questioned in terms of the corporate objectives is a necessary control. There are other measures there that are looking to manage our current position.
You want to come back, Chris?
Thank you. Yes, there is effectively an equation here, or it's an imbalance, and that's what's creating this threat to us. And it's not merely the problem that we've got on the schools funding, but that most definitely is the tipping point which has caused it, no doubt, to go into the red. But there's an equation, an imbalance between the budget and our agreed short and medium-term corporate objectives. Who makes the decision about whether or not within this risk register we just concentrate on the budget side, or if we question the other side of the equation, the agreed short-term and medium-term corporate objectives? Who makes that decision?
Michael, do you want to come back?
Yeah, again, through you, Chair, the controls that are in place there do talk in relation to the first one in terms of the business planning process. That business planning process includes then the monitoring of that through the budget, and earlier on in the agenda we had the integrated financial monitoring report, which addresses and notes actions to take in terms of bringing budgets back in line. Some of that will be taking difficult decisions, and that is a responsibility of budget owners and the corporate leadership team in proposing that and in through the committee system in terms of any decision making that's needed. And that is the proper and due course for these to be enacted.
So, Chris, please correct me, Stephen and Michael, if I'm wrong, but my interpretation of what the answer to your question is that we own a risk. We own it through the statutory officer and the leadership team. If you want to name, I think it's Michael's, but we own it through our leadership team. It is their job to give us options as to what we do about it. But legally, it's their ownership, because this is not the business plan. This is the risk register. In terms of whether we, in terms of what list of options that menu includes, again, that's what the business planning is about, but not the risk register as far as I'm understanding it. Yes, Chris.
I think it would very much. I think the Chief Executive would like to speak here. We're talking here about a risk register, and that's substantially separate from the other work that we do. It has to be separate in order to have some degree of objectivity. And so what I was asking is, why isn't an obvious question on the list of potential solutions in the risk register? I'm not asking for the solutions which are going to be proposed. That's a different matter. And I think the Chief Executive is quite keen to answer that question.
I'm not. May have double microphones now, who knows? Thank you to Councillor Bowden. I think rather than going into a long answer, I would actually say I think the point is well made, and it's something that the risk owner can take away and look at. I do think the question is entirely appropriate and should be posed in terms of how we manage the risk. Ultimately, as the Deputy Leader and Chair of the committee has said, the decision-making around business planning and priorities are, of course, political decisions for elected members, but they are given options by officers. So yes, the process is one in which officers produce options, but ultimately, of course, those are for member decision. Really importantly, the question should be asked, though, as part of how the risk is developed and the risk is scored. So I think the suggestion is a good one. Thank you.
Very good. Yes, Steve.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for that additional response, Stephen, Chief Exec, because whilst I was going to weigh in behind Councillor Bowden on this, I do think that it exemplifies something we was talking about earlier. So this risk is no longer, will the council have sufficient money to perform its mandatory duties or statutory duties? That is not the name of this risk. The name of this risk is, does it have enough money to carry out its corporate objectives? We had a discussion earlier on about whether or not you could have a 0% council tax rise, or consult on that at least, to see where the public are on it and the reasons that the joint administration gave for voting it down. But the difference being that there is a big difference between the council operating its mandatory services and the council fulfilling its corporate objectives, which are set by the joint administration. There's a big difference both strategically and financially. So there is a huge gulf between the two, and it is possible that perhaps different taxation levels would have come out on the back of that. So I think it's useful to have that as an action, as a control. And obviously what would happen in the future, to give an example of how this would be used in the future, we know that in my opinion, there are enormous amount of reserves that could be deployed differently. That's a different view to Section 151 officer. I appreciate he's the professional and then he gives his view on that. But I'm just saying personally, I think that. Now, there might come a day where one of the, let's say the money was running out and the Section 151 officer had only a few choices left on how to balance. One of those might be, he may say, well, we could temporarily or permanently adjust some of these reserves, or actually we could go back to the joint administration and say, one of these policies of yours is costing an awful lot of money. It would be better, in my point of view, if you remove that instead of us attacking reserves. So by introducing this action control into the risk register, it's better managed because it gives the Section 151 officer and other officers more choice about what options to put on the table. I would say that in the triggers, I'll go back to the actual change. So the change, I totally agree with why it's gone from orange to red. At the present point in time, the failure on the county council's part to actually stick to the send agreement that they set up with government puts that funding at risk. Right? There's many reasons behind it, but we saw from the audit report, a lot of the reasons are internal. If we fail to get a new safety valve agreement signed off, or it's significantly different, we will lose a significant amount of money, which puts us in red zone. But the reason given was actually slightly different to that, and that is the fact that nationally, everybody might lose the right to charge their send deficit and just put it to one side. So I agree with the reason that was given, but there's a secondary one here at County Council, and that is the potential for us to fail to secure the safety valve revised programme. There is a third one, and that's actually the budget point at when these papers were written. So we know that the council was 11 million plus of overspend across various directorates. This was helped by the reduction in service delivery by adults, which actually took about 2.5, 3 million down to about that 9, I think it's 9 million or something like that, working from memory. So there's a £9 million overspend that there is risk that there is an action plan against, but if that isn't delivered, again, that puts us into red. And that is not mentioned. But also in the triggers, one of the triggers, which is missing in my opinion, is the horizon scanning. And the horizon scanning, we saw what happened yesterday. If we don't know for certain what any government, Labour or Conservative or any other future government would do, we don't have horizon scanning in the triggers for what might have happened as a substantial budget change from central government. And I suggest that that might be one thing that we ought to add in there, just so that we're aware of what's coming on the horizon. Thank you, Chair.
Steve, thank you very much. I think in between in there were some valuable suggestions which I hope have been noted and taken on board. Is there any response that we need to give? Any more comments? Yes, Michael.
I'll just come back on those, if I may, Chair. I think trigger 1 and trigger 7 cover the points, but if they're not as overt, then certainly can have a look at the wording. I think the biggest issue here is focusing in on the controls and the control environment, noting the point the Chief Executive made in relation to the last point. So we'll take that away and continue to address and refine the register as it stands in terms of particularly control 1 there.
Yeah, thank you. Just to clarify, Michael, and you're absolutely right about 1 and 7. I was saying that the horizon scanning was missing. I was not saying 1 and 7 was missing. What I was saying with regards to 1 and 7, was that the reason given for us moving from orange to red was purely the fact that nationally the high needs deficit block, it may be removed as being able to move it to one side. And I was saying, in my opinion, 1 and 7 are triggered because 1, we're currently spending more than we have, so we don't know if that will come true. And 7, which is failure to meet the safety valve agreed trajectory. At the moment, we don't know if we'll get no deal. So I think that the explanation for why you moved from orange to red should have been widened, not that they were missing here. Does that make sense?
It does through you, Chair, and that's what I was meaning in terms of expansion of the wording within the triggers. You'll see down further on there are the action plans, including the workforce expenditure panel, in terms of the current year's overspend. And I suppose what I'm looking at is when you look at trigger 1. And that horizon scanning, clearly the council needs to, and I in my section 25 consideration, look longer than just the 1 year or the current year's budget. It's looking at a consideration over the medium term. And so therefore, when I read trigger 1, I read horizon scanning, but I think it's helpful for members' awareness that we add clarity into that trigger.
Thank you. That is very useful. Did I see any other hands? Mark, did I imagine it? Did you want to speak? No, that's great. In which case, I mean, this isn't for voting really, because again, we are recommended to note it. But of all the items for noting that come to us, this is one of the ones that most regularly gets us to discuss things in depth, which I think is a very good thing. And it's a reflection on just how well this work is done. So thank you so much, Mairead, and everybody else around you. Thank you, Michael, for those useful comments. The report is therefore noted, which moves us on to item 14. Michelle.
Thank you, Chair. 2 issues. You'll see from the agenda plan that there is a special meeting planned on the 28th of November. The monitoring officer has agreed to call that, and it will be the same arrangements regarding the fact that those that are on district councils won't be able to be part of that meeting. And the other item is that we need to nominate a member technology champion.
Thank you, Michelle. I do believe I have a proposal to make in terms of the member technology champion. Before I make that proposal, is anybody wishing to? Yes, Steve.
Yeah, I wish to raise a point about the agenda plan as sort of a more like this is to do with corporate governance than anything else. So we saw at full council there was a motion that went forward on the bridge in St. Neots about what's happening there, and the joint administration put forward an amendment to delay deciding whether £250,000 is a good idea to spend on an options appraisal. We'll put it on the Highways and Transport Committee. Now, we saw at full council when we looked at the action note, the Highways and Transport Committee scheduled to discuss that is November of 2025. Okay. Now, discussions gone on since then. That's far too long, because that's not actually a decision whether to spend money. That's a decision whether to spend that money at all on an options appraisal. Now, our role as the Strategy and Resources Committee is there's an overarching role here, and I've never seen anybody comment on somebody else's agenda plan, and it might be wholly within the Constitution that we can't. But it occurs to me that if we are an overarching committee that really has an element of, say, to a certain degree, just a commentary for other ones, would it be appropriate? Is it within the Constitution for us to say to the Highways and Transport Committee, actually, you've been instructed by full council to consider whether or not £250,000 is correct to spend on an options appraisal. It should not take you 18 months from that council meeting to do that. So my question is, one, is that an appropriate question? And if not, could we have Constitution and Ethics consider whether we are in fact an overarching committee, or the delineation simply says that that's not for you to decide, that's nothing to do with you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Steve. I really have a feeling that question's not for us, but I'll take advisement, Stephen.
Chair, my immediate reaction is if we can capture the points Councillor Count has made, I think that's for the monitoring officer to give a ruling on, and obviously, if need be, to refer on to Constitution and Ethics. Thank you.
So Steve, can I suggest you approach the monitoring officer to speed things up? I mean, it's been taken, so there you go. Are there any further comments on the agenda plan? If not, are there any suggestions on the member technology champion? Anyone in particular fancy the job? Now, I have had a request.
I'm good on plugs.
Right. In which case you're elected by acclamation. No, you're not. I mean, actually, I had an expression of interest from Councillor Beckett, and I would like to propose that in the absence of anybody else who desperately wants it. Yes, Steve.
Chair, yeah, if Councillor Beckett wants to do it, but I am concerned because, in my opinion, he doesn't have enough time to do his Highways and Transport Committee chair job at the moment. We see repeated failures and even getting visits or responses to emails. Should he really be taking something else on?
Maybe you could ask him that. I am sure that he's considering his workload very carefully, and I did not pressure him into this at all whatsoever. So we'll take that as being the only suggestion that has been made. And if there are any questions, I'm sure that he can take them on them himself. In terms of everything else, I think that we are only to note the agenda plan, which we have done. There are actions against it, which will be taken forward. We've done the member technology champion. I cannot believe I'm about to say this. I can close the meeting now. Thank you, everybody, for your contributions. It's been a marathon, but I think it's been very well worth it. Have a good lunch. I intend to.